Chapter 479. Read. Brother Ji Yunan, please follow me, Li Si said to Ji Yunan with a calm smile. The two of them had already arrived at the inner world. Li Si walked in front, leading Ji Yunan over. Li Si was a handsome young man with dashing eyebrows and starry eyes. However, his actual age was much older than Lu Wen's, and he could be considered an almighty from the Middle Ages. Li Si's most famous deed was, of course, when he had relied on an endless combination of spells to escape from the hands of another Dao integration cultivator before he had even reached Dao integration. From that day onwards, no one dared to provoke Li Si. They practically treated him as a future Dao integration cultivator. Li Si didn't disappoint. Over 1,000 years later, he successfully progressed to the Dao integration stage and became a mighty figure. Li Si was now a rank 13 Dao integration cultivator, surpassing Song Fei, who had advanced earlier than him. It was only a matter of time before he surpassed the others. Of course, the first problem he faced now was not to let Ji Yunan catch up to him too quickly. Ji Yunan followed behind Li Si and slowly stepped through the gate of the inner world. He then saw the familiar yet unfamiliar inner world. This was not his first time coming to the inner world. Back when he was still at rank 3, he had accidentally entered this place because of a private instance dungeon. It was during that experience that he met Zhuozhuo and the others, which led to a series of subsequent events. Later on, in order to obtain sin points and points, Ji Yunan also used the inner world as an instance dungeon center and ran here to find a new instance dungeon. After he officially completed his first profession transition and entered the God Nation stage, the inner world that had briefly appeared in Ji Yunan's vision had finally completely disappeared from the stage of history. Now that Ji Yunan had returned, when he looked at the inner world again, his impression was completely different from before. There were still countless tiny light spots floating around the light balls. They were the Star Lords who were constantly searching for the astral world. Such a strange existence was something that Ji Yunan had never seen in the game in his previous life. Even the world of gods did not have it. Only the world of heavens had it. Back then, when Ji Yunan looked at the inner world, he only felt that it was strange everywhere. Now that he knew it was man-made, it seemed more simple and crude. It was as if it had been forcibly pieced together and existed only to fulfill its function without any decoration. Don't you think it's a little too simple? Li Si seemed to understand what Ji Yunan was thinking and said with a smile, "When I first came here, I felt the same way." Li Si had also been here for the first time, which meant that he was not one of the creators of the inner world. This place was most likely created by someone who had fused the Dao even earlier. When he came here for the first time, Li Si, and the others, the integration cultivators, Dao fusion masters, Li, and Dao, Nan, Li, Ji Nan, and Dao. These Dao, Li said, they Li, when they were Yi, Si, Nan, these gods, they, world masters Li, them. If this goes on, all the Dao fragments will disappear one day. There will be only a few astral realms left in the world of heavens, and the world of heavens will not live up to its name. As Li Si spoke, Ji Yunan gradually gained a new understanding of the history of the past and the worldview of the world of heavens. Speaking of which, he already knew most of this, but he did not connect it all and looked at it from a new perspective. To put it simply, the world of heavens was like a sphere that rotated continuously, and the planes, or astral realms, were the organizational particles within the sphere. The heaven-level plane was the center of the sphere. It took up a large portion of the space, and its position was completely fixed. The world-level plane was slightly smaller and was located at the edge of the center, but it had its own stable position and would not be thrown away from the center. The world-level planes below the two did not have such good treatment. Almost all of them were outside the center, and due to the sphere's rotation, they were constantly thrown away from the edge. The time flow of the heaven-level and world-level planes was completely unified, while the other planes always had their own differences in the flow of time. Using Ji Yunan's limited knowledge of physics to speculate, it was roughly because the planes were in different orbits, and their relative speeds were very different, which led to the difference in the flow of time. In ancient times, there was no such thing as a celestial lord. Li Si continued, back then, in order to prevent the plane fragments from drifting away, The saints called for cultivators to leave the main plane and continuously expand outwards. They also passed down the cultivation method of combining one's body with the plane. Hearing this, Ji-Yunan could not help but laugh. So that's how the Celestial Lord controls the astral realm. Although it was also a combination of a plane and oneself, the neighboring gods built their own god nations, which was completely different from the world of heavens. Although the two reached the same goal by different means, there was a huge difference in the god nation stage. The celestial lords control the astral realm and continuously strengthen themselves, and the astral realm will also continuously grow. When they advance to the world level, this plane fragment will be completely saved. Li Si continued, however, there are too many world fragments, and if we rely on the celestial lords to freely pull them, the efficiency will be too low. Therefore, the second generation of Tao integrators decided to first gather all the fragments, and the mechanism of this gathering is the inner realm. After saying this, Li Si continued to lead Ji-Yunan forward. They had already walked into the core of the inner world, the control center in the truest sense of the word. Then, he retracted the nomological laws that controlled the control center, and indicated that Ji-Yunan would take over this position. He smiled and said, I don't need to say much about what's going to happen next. Someone will tell you. Ji-Yunan looked at him strangely. When he reflected the nomological laws into the control center, he suddenly felt an inexplicable throbbing, as if something inside the control center was jumping. Alive! Ji-Yunan turned to look at Li Si, but the latter only nodded slightly, indicating that he should wait for a while. Sure enough, after a short while, Ji-Yunan heard a gentle female voice reverberating in his ears. I'm very happy to meet you, new king. In front of Ji-Yunan, a woman's silhouette was slowly forming. This woman had a slender figure, but her body was completely formed from blue beams of light, and there was no facial features on her face. We usually call her Zero. Li Si finally spoke again. She is the origin of the inner realm, and also a life form that is symbiotic with this place. You're a butler, right? Ji-Yunan was not affected by Li Si at all, and he immediately saw through Zero's nature. To put it bluntly, this group of Tao integrators were rather busy and did not have the time to deal with the affairs of the plane fragment, so they found a full-time butler. You're right, King. Zero's voice sounded again. I was first created as a butler. Ji-Yunan looked at Li Si. What do you mean by king? Li Si smiled and said, Here, you can control the entire world and anything you want to control. In a sense, you're the king of the world. Chapter 480. Read. Yes, king. Zero's voice echoed, you can do whatever you want, as long as the other party is still in the world. The king of the world? Ji-Yunan thought for a moment, then pointed at Li Si and said, Zero, help me get rid of this annoying guy first. Zero's voice suddenly fell silent, as if she had never received such an order before. For the first time, Li Si felt that Ji-Yunan was out of line, and he could not help but laugh. I won't trouble you with that. I'm about to leave. Fellow cultivator Ji-Yu, we'll meet again if fate allows it. After saying this, Li Si had no intention of staying any longer, and his figure quickly disappeared. After he disappeared, Zero's voice sounded weakly. King, his power cannot be controlled by the world, I know. Ji-Yunan waved his hand. If some *T king of the world could really control Tao integration cultivators, then it would really be strange. In fact, not to mention Tao integration cultivators, even ordinary astral realms with a main one had very weak control over the inner world. The inner world reflected all the realms in reality. Including the current 16 days, none of the realms could escape, including Ji-Yunan's divine kingdom. However, this did not mean that the inner world had any control over these astral realms. As long as the astral realms were already controlled by the astral lord, the world itself would first be controlled by the astral lord, and only then would it be indirectly influenced by the inner world. Of course, apart from boring people like Ji-Yunan, no Tao integration cultivator would try to influence other realms through the inner world. If there was really something that needed to be influenced, they could just send an order over. The inner world had to be controlled by a Tao integration cultivator because it needed the support of Tao integration level nomological laws to complete the normal operation of the inner world. For Tao integration cultivators, this was completely useless, and there was almost no meaning to their existence other than to satisfy some of the pleasure of controlling the world. According to the agreement between Tao integration cultivators, each person would be on duty for 1,000 years, and any pleasure would be gone by then. No wonder Li Si left as if he was fleeing, and did not want to stay a minute longer. "Is there anything else you need me to do?" Ji Nan asked as he sized up the inner world. "That's all. If anything unexpected happens, I will contact you immediately." Zero's voice sounded weak, as if he was afraid that Ji Nan would give him some strange orders. According to the normal procedure, after Ji Nan's curiosity gradually subsided, he would return to his own home. Then, after 100 years or so, an unexpected situation would occur. The so-called accidents were mostly the sudden collapse of a certain plane, which affected the nearby planes, or a plane that transitioned on its own and needed Ji Nan's help to stabilize it. It was all these boring little things. This was the daily life of the so-called king of the world. However, Ji Nan did not leave quickly because he realized that being the king of the world was quite interesting. King of the world? That suits me very well. Ji Nan nodded and turned his gaze to a certain plane called the Ghost Sea World. Gui Haisha. Vivian carried Adam, who was covered in blood, and ran quickly in the dense forest. At the same time, she had to dodge the arrows that were shot from behind. It was extremely difficult to walk. After a while, the pursuers were still getting closer and closer. Vivian knew that she could not escape, so she put Adam down from her back. "Adam, hurry up and leave. I will stop them," Vivian said through gritted teeth, but her heart was filled with regret. If she had not insisted on coming, everyone would not have made the mission like this in order to protect her. Now that Sister Nancy and Jonathan's whereabouts were unknown, and Adam was poisoned because he had to escape with her, it was time for her to stand up. However, the next moment, she was thrown away by a strong force from behind. Adam had stood up and said with a grin, "Even if I am crippled, it is not your turn to protect me. Hurry up and go, help me tell Nancy." Vivian's whole body spun in the air until she fell heavily to the ground. She could not hear what Adam wanted to tell Nancy clearly, but she could not stop her tears from flowing. She hated herself for having no power, just like when she watched her brother die. She thought that everything was on the right track, and she told herself that it would never happen again. She did not expect that after only a few months, she would have to go through it again. However, Vivian was very strong. Even if her body felt like it was falling apart, she still forced herself to stand up, and quickly moved forward while wiping the tears on her face. The mission must be completed. If not, only death awaits. This was the rule of God's space. She must find Sister Nancy and Jonathan. She did not want to die, and she did not want Adam to die in vain. Just as Vivian was moving forward bravely, in the white fog, Red Tail was furious. What the hell is going on? Why is this kind of mission evaluated as 3 stars? Red Tail fiercely threw a stack of mission records and said angrily, "According to the plan, Vivian's mission this time should be successfully completed after a battle of wits and courage. Only at the last moment would they be arranged to split into 2 groups. Vivian's mistake would cause Adam's death, and before he died, he would tell his story to Vivian. Of course, it would be a story related to God, betrayal, and corruption. Sir, this time it was our mistake." The young man in white uniform was constantly wiping the cold sweat on his face. He did not expect that Red Tail would encounter such a serious problem when he only came by occasionally. This completely disrupted the training plan of Observer Body Number 29. Red Tail's anger had not subsided, and she said, "Where's Adam?" As soon as her voice fell, a blue-haired young man rushed in from outside with an angry expression on his face. "What are you doing? This mission is definitely not 3 stars, at least." "Hey, Lady Red Tail." Adam was complaining about the intelligence personnel's mistake when he happened to see Red Tail's figure and quickly saluted. Red Tail waved her hand and asked directly, "You fought with people from the enemy forces, how do you feel?" The intelligence on the enemy floating island is correct, but this is a confrontation mission. Adam immediately said without hesitation, "What are the reincarnation team doing, arranging a confrontation mission into the blasphemy plan?" As soon as he said this, everyone came to a sudden realization. If it was a confrontation mission, the other party was a genuine reincarnator from the divine world, which meant that the mission difficulty was half a star higher out of nowhere. It was no wonder that the team could not fight back at all. After all, the members of the team had to pretend to be people from the divine world, and their abilities could only be obtained from the Lord space. How could they compare to other reincarnators? Red Tail did not have the time to investigate what had happened. She said coldly, "How do you plan to solve this matter?" Adam and the young man in uniform looked at each other, and the latter said, "In my opinion, at this time, we can only rely on external help, such as arranging for Nancy to suddenly advance. You might as well hope that meteorites fall from the sky and smash all the enemies to death," Adam said, pursing his lips. Vivian was not a fool. How could she not see whether Nancy had advanced or not? However, at this moment, someone beside her suddenly exclaimed, "You guys! Look!" This person pointed at the image on the screen at the side. It was the location where the two floating islands were fighting. Meteorites kept falling from the sky, and strangely, they all landed on the enemy's side. In less than a moment, Sky City's floating island had achieved a complete victory, and Vivian and the others' mission was declared complete. Everyone in White Mist was dumbfounded, and they all looked at Adam with a strange expression. Even Adam himself was in a daze, wondering if he had some sort of special ability with the spirit of speech. "Don't look at me like that, actually, Hey, did these meteorites create some words?" Adam said hurriedly, as if he had suddenly realized something. Chapter 481. Read. Vivian still couldn't accept the fact that the mission was suddenly completed, and then the three of them were directly sent back to God's space. It's a hidden time-limited mission. Nancy's face was gloomy, and she stabbed her sword into the ground, her back looking a little weak. "What's that?" Jonathan's expression was equally ugly. They had already learned from Vivian what had happened after the four of them separated. Adam was not summoned back by God's space, so he would never return. Nancy glanced at him and said, "The mission difficulty is higher than normal, and it's very difficult to complete directly, but there is actually a time limit. As long as you can persist until the time limit is up, the mission will be automatically completed." Jonathan seemed to be stunned for a long time before he said angrily, "God's space is too deceptive. Since it's a time-limited mission, why didn't you tell us in advance? If we knew the time limit in advance, we wouldn't have been so focused on completing the mission." Nancy sighed and said, "If we were allowed to delay time, the difficulty of the mission would probably be different." Jonathan opened his mouth and could only sigh helplessly in the end. God's space really doesn't have a chance to take advantage of loopholes. "It's all my fault, all my fault." Vivian half squatted on the ground, her hands holding her head, and said in an incomparably low voice, "If I could persist a little longer and didn't give up so quickly, Adam wouldn't have died." There were meteorites falling from the sky, and this scene was naturally seen by Vivian, so she knew very well that the mission was completed in just a moment. If she could persist a little longer, even if she had to stay and fight side by side with Adam, the two of them would have a high chance of survival. Although Nancy also looked depressed, she still walked in front of Vivian and patted her on the shoulder, saying, "It's not your fault. Even I didn't think that this would be a time-limited mission." Vivian raised her head, her eyes were blank, as if the faith in her heart had collapsed again. The scene fell into silence, and Nancy didn't speak again. Adam's death had already made her feel haggard. It was not until a long time later that Jonathan's voice slowly sounded, "If you don't want what happened today to happen again, then quickly reach the third stage and enter God's Square." God's Square was a place that only third-stage reincarnators could enter, and it was a place for all reincarnators to exchange supplies and exchange information. The reason why Nancy and the others were able to communicate with the other reincarnators was also because of the existence of the Lord's Plaza. Grade 3? Vivian stared at Jonathan for a while, then nodded heavily. In the exclusive space of Nancy's team, in the small village where they could rest, Jonathan and Nancy were talking alone after avoiding Vivian. "It's finally over." Jonathan shook his head helplessly. "Those people from the reincarnation group are really unreliable. They even arranged a battle mission for us." Nancy couldn't help but curl her lips. "I can't believe they made up a time-limited mission. Tell me, Why did so many meteorites fall that day? Some big shot should make a move. Jonathan said without raising his head. It's said that the one behind the organization has just been promoted. Who knows how powerful those big shots are? Nancy's knowledge was clearly above Jonathan's. She slowly shook her head and said, "The Ghost Sea world is an astral plane. There are no meteorites in the astral plane. Someone who can do this is definitely not an ordinary astral lord." Hearing this, Jonathan couldn't help but be slightly stunned, and then said, "Who cares? Once we complete Vivian's mission line and return to the organization, we'll know. Speaking of which, I'm really a little envious of Adam." According to the normal script, Adam was supposed to be Vivian's spiritual mentor. How could he get off work so easily? Nancy also smiled but didn't say anything. At this time, Nancy didn't look cold at all like she usually did. She looked no different from an ordinary person. If Vivian saw this scene, she would most likely suspect that the person she knew was a fake Nancy. In fact, that was not wrong. The person she knew was a fake Nancy. Even the name Nancy was fake. Everyone she met in the God space was an actor from the White Fog. Even the journey that Vivian was about to take was arranged beforehand. What mission would succeed, what mission would fail, what mission would meet a key person? When this mission is over, I won't accept such a mission anymore. Nancy said again. She's a pretty good little girl. If one day she finds out that everyone is lying to her, then, don't be soft-hearted and tell her the truth. Jonathan's voice suddenly became louder and his face was full of seriousness. That will only get everyone killed. Do you understand? White Mist was not a benevolent organization. Jonathan knew this very well. I know. Nancy nodded and said expressionlessly, "Sir." Not long after Red Tail walked out of the observation room, he saw Ji Yunan. It wasn't Ji Yunan's real body that had arrived, but a clone of him. With Ji Yunan's current realm, it wasn't difficult for him to have thousands of clones. Shadow originally had this attribute. "Do you see that meteorite?" Ji Yunan said with a faint smile. "If there's a need for this in the future when you train blasphemers, you can give me a list." Red Tail was slightly shocked and quickly nodded in agreement. Even Nancy knew how difficult it was to create a meteor shower in the Sea of Ghosts. How could Red Tail not know that? Not to mention using meteorites to create fixed words. This meant that Ji Yunan could completely control the laws of heaven and earth according to his will. Even the lord of this world would have to go through a long period of preparation if he wanted to do this, let alone outsiders. If this power was used in the Reincarnator organization, it would definitely be a heaven-defying cheat. However, Red Tail didn't dare to let Ji Yunan work for her. She only dared to hand over matters related to the blasphemer plan to Ji Yunan. Red Tail knew very well that the blasphemer plan would be Ji Yunan's next priority. Even the White Fog and the entire God Kingdom would all be in service of this. Also, Ji Yunan said as expected, there are too few blasphemers now. A few dozen won't be enough. There are so many main planes in the Pantheon world. Will there be a lack of targets? Red Tail nodded hurriedly, but then said, the main thing is to design the mission route for each blasphemer and free up people to act as teammates. It takes up too much manpower. If the White Fog continues to recruit people, the organization structure will be too bloated. Chapter 482. Reading. Management was a science. As an otaku who only knew how to play games, Ji Yunan actually did not know anything about management. All he knew was to hand over specialized tasks to professionals. If the professionals refused to do it, then find a way to make them do it. If that didn't work, then force them to do it. So when the blasphemer plan, which was the highest priority and was personally arranged by Ji Yunan to jump the queue, suddenly entered the daily work of the White Mist, all kinds of problems were bound to arise. It was not too late to discover the problem now, and the countermeasures that Ji Yunan came up with were also effective. Since the planning of God's space required too much manpower and affected the normal operation of the White Mist, then this part of the function could be handed over. If the work couldn't be done, the blame would be shifted, right? Handing over the God space to the head of the cabinet was also a more beneficial approach for the God Kingdom. Because of Ji Yunan's closed-door policy, The God Kingdom itself also needed to maintain external communication, and God Space was a good entry point. Half a month later, after Ji Yunan sat down in the God Kingdom, Yang Xiaoxiao was reporting to him about the progress of God Space and the Blasphemer Plan during this time. The Blasphemer Plan is going well. At present, the number of observers has exceeded 100, and nearly 20 of them have been evaluated as S-level, with greater potential to inherit the godhood. In terms of God Space, the cabinet has now established the Gods Department, which is responsible for this aspect of affairs. At present, we have prepared more than 50 masterless planes, and all the tasks that the blasphemers will perform will be determined and screened by the cabinet itself to avoid the problem of evaluation errors. In terms of the execution of affairs, the cabinet was indeed much more complete than the White Mist organization. At least for the tasks of God Space, the White Mist could only rely on reincarnation tasks, while the cabinet could prepare people to design their own, and the gap in resources was extremely huge. After all, the cabinet was now the essence of the entire God Kingdom, and almost all the think tanks were roped in. Good job. Ji Yunan nodded and praised. The cabinet needs a prime minister. Have you considered taking this position? Of course, he said this to Yang Xiaoxiao. After becoming the spirit of the Holy Kingdom, Yang Xiaoxiao would never feel tired and would always have endless energy. She did not need to eat or sleep and could easily understand what was happening in every corner of the Holy Kingdom. Such an existence was simply the most perfect steward candidate. My pleasure. Yang Xiaoxiao smiled and said, if you don't mind that the Kingdom of God will not have a second prime minister, teacher. Ji Yunan shrugged, indicating that he did not mind. Even the current cabinet could have such high efficiency, to a large extent, also because of Yang Xiaoxiao. Moreover, after Yang Xiaoxiao became the spirit of the divine nations, it was almost impossible for her to betray Ji Yunan, because she herself coexisted with the divine nations. How does it feel to be the king of the world? Yu Lian asked Ji Yunan with a faint smile on her face. Not bad. Ji Yunan said casually, but that's Zero. Why does she sound like someone from the world of gods? Although she spoke in the language of the world of gods, Zero's words gave Ji Yunan a sense of familiarity. It was like the way NPCs spoke in games he used to play. Yu Lian looked at him meaningfully. You're right, Zero's original body is indeed from the world of gods. Back then, my Grandmaster and the other two sages went there and even participated in their first divine war. The First God War? Ji Yunan could not help but raise his eyebrows. The First God War was before the most active group of lords had truly matured. It was an era that belonged to the older generation of gods. If the two worlds had already had contact and even communication a long time ago, then the background of the world of gods here might be slightly different from what Ji Yunan remembered. Yu Lian only nodded lightly and waited for Ji Yunan to ask questions. Of course, she did not bring this up unintentionally. Instead, she was trying to probe Ji Yunan's background. Now, the fusing path of the world of gods no longer had any doubts about Ji Yunan's identity. After all, he was an evil god who had Austin's testimony. However, what this evil god had done in his past life and who he had been in contact with was still a mystery. Yu Lian and the others naturally tried to investigate, but they came up empty-handed. The ancient era of the world of gods was the same era as the world of gods. That was before the collapse of the three realms. There were almost no historical records passed down, so the later generations did not know what happened back then. Ji Yunan thought about it and said, are there any records of this in the world of gods? Now that he had completed his second profession transition, Ji Yunan had a way to escape even if he had to face Austin directly. The Blasphemer Plan was already in progress, so Ji Yunan had enough time to do some things that he was interested in, such as exploring the mysteries of the world of gods. Zero's existence felt somewhat familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen her. Perhaps he would only know if he found her original body. Yes. Yu Lian's smile widened, as if she had been waiting for Ji Yunan to say this. However, in exchange for the information, I hope you can promise me one thing. Because fusing path of gods could not threaten each other's lives, they often made such deals. Yu Lian was already very familiar with this. Ji Yunan did not mind paying some compensation to save time and effort in obtaining information. He immediately nodded and said, "What is it?" "I have a disciple who wants to learn from you for a period of time," Yu Lian said as she stared into Ji Yunan's eyes. Ji Yunan could not help but laugh. "Since you know that I'm an evil god, you should understand that some things cannot be learned just by learning." "Of course," Yu Lian said. "She's just learning from you. You don't need to teach her anything. The world of gods is happy to collect all kinds of cultivation roots." Yi Wu. As she spoke, a young girl had already walked out from the back with quick steps. She hurriedly came before Ji Yunan and bowed. "Lord Ji Yunan, my name is Yi Wu. You can call me Little Wu. Please take care of me." Ji Yunan glanced at her and said non-committally, "How long will she be learning? I might be going to the world of gods very soon." 1 year. Yu Lian looked at Ji Yunan's expression. She had originally wanted to say 100 years, but after considering Ji Yunan's growth process, she decided to shorten it by 100-fold. "No matter where you go, just take her with you. When the 1-year agreement is over, the world of gods information will be made available to you." "All right." Ji Yunan did not have any objections. With his current abundance of time, he could afford to wait for a year. It was just a matter of going to the world of gods to investigate first. When Yi Wu heard Ji Yunan agree, she seemed very excited. Her little face flushed red. "Then I'll have to trouble you, Lord Ji Yunan. Please do not mind my existence. Whether it's cultivation or comprehension, you can do as you normally do." Chapter 483. Read. The Blasphemer project was a relatively long process. There were no advertisements for quick updates. In fact, after the game had successfully transitioned to the second class, the main factor in the game's design changed from attracting players to keeping them. They hoped to keep players addicted to the game as much as possible, so they provided more ways to kill time, such as letting players continuously nurture NPCs and have them hunt gods. This was because the sin points gained from hunting gods was far more than the players killing gods themselves. Of course, even so, players often faced the problem of not being able to kill enough gods and never having enough sin points. In the end, they had no choice but to turn their attention to the main gods. But how could the main gods be killed so easily? After the second class, even if players wanted to kill an opponent of the same level, it would be far more difficult than before. After all, the main gods themselves represented a part of the rules, and simply destroying their divine bodies would not be able to kill them completely. Wanting to kill the main gods was a rather time-consuming and laborious task. However, the advantage that Ji Yunan had now compared to the actual game was that he had a lot of time. After all, the game was played by the players, and the players' time was not unlimited. On the other hand, right now, well, Ji Yunan time was, in a sense, unlimited. Therefore, Ji Yunan was in no hurry at all. The Blasphemer project was progressing slowly, and the god space that matched it required a lot of manpower and resources to build. The god space that was in a complete state should be a self-sufficient system that controlled the overall situation of many unowned planes, and could send the blasphemers in at any time. At the same time, it could obtain resources from all the planes. It was still at the stage where it was completely reliant on the supply from the god kingdom. At most, it could only be considered the primary stage of socialism. Therefore, Ji Yunan's current plan was to wait for new developments in the Blasphemer project, and then make a trip to the Pantheon world to understand the history there in detail. According to Yu Lian, as early as the First Pantheon War, the saints of the Pantheon world had already interfered with the Pantheon world. Therefore, it was worth investigating the differences between the history here and the one in Ji Yunan's memory. It's your turn. On the starship heading to the Pantheon world, Ji Yunan was holding a few cards in his hand as he spoke to Yi Wu unhurriedly. Yi Wu was frowning and thinking hard. She was not a genius like Yu Lian who could play everything in seconds. In the face of a game like black cards, which required a lot of strategy, she was tortured for a while. However, Yi Wu, who was a little slow, was still studying methodically. He followed Ji Yunan's instructions and seriously learned how to play cards. Yi Wu, who was often sent out by Yu Lian to learn from various big shots, could be considered to have seen the world. She had seen all kinds of strange teachers. Not to mention teaching by playing cards, there were also teachers who painted, farmed, and even visited brothels. Therefore, Yiwu studied very hard. He even tried to understand the rules of the black solitaire game bit by bit. He was also pondering whether there was a deeper meaning behind it. Perhaps there was a truth hidden within the rules of the cards. Ji Yunan did not take Yi Wu's thoughts to heart at all. He was just looking for someone to play cards with. On this trip to the Pantheon world, Ji Yunan could be said to have truly changed his appearance. Not only did he change his attire, but he also changed his height and appearance. The only thing missing was his personality. This could not be helped. He was too famous now. Moreover, because he had just advanced to Dao integration, there were too many people who knew what he looked like. As long as Ji Yunan did not want to hide himself everywhere, it was necessary to change his appearance. On the other hand, with Ji Yunan's current identity, it was not suitable for him to enter the Pantheon world alone. That would be too big of a target, and the 13 lords were not fools. Instead, no one would notice him if he blended in with the crowd. Another 2 rounds were over. Unsurprisingly, student Yi Wu was utterly defeated. If she had to take off her clothes for every round she lost, she would probably be skinned alive. I lost again. I'm so stupid, Yi Wu said in distress, as if she was very dissatisfied with her performance. However, Yi Wu had always been indomitable. She did not give up. She pondered the rules of the black solitaire game while saying, "Lord Ji Yu, where are we going this time?" Saint Gervais continent. Ji Yunan seemed to be in a good mood. He explained casually, "The Temple of Scholars is probably the place with the most complete information about the history of the gods. Saint Gervais continent was controlled by the light god system and managed by the god of knowledge, Jones. In the Pantheon world, the group of people with the most knowledge were the mags, and the person with the most knowledge was definitely the god of knowledge. The god of knowledge was also known as the god of scholars. He was one of the oldest gods. As for the person, there had been several generations. However, the god of knowledge was also very rare. He was a god whose strength would increase every time he was replaced. In the early days of the Pantheon world, the god of knowledge was just a small god with a remote priesthood. His divine power was also quite weak, and he did not even have many believers. However, with the development of history, whether it was gods or mortals, knowledge was constantly accumulating, which imperceptibly increased the divine power of the god of knowledge. Therefore, the god of knowledge of this generation had divine power equivalent to at least a level 9 god. If this continued, this god would become a lord sooner or later. "Are the 2 of you heading to the Saint Gervais continent as well?" A curious voice came from the side, and it was directed at Ji Yunan and Nana. They were not sitting in their own rooms playing cards, but directly staying in the hall of the starship. Naturally, their conversation would be heard by the people around them. As the starship was very small, and it took only a few hours to reach the Pantheon world, there was no need to arrange a separate room for them to rest in. Ji Yunan raised his head and looked. The person who spoke was an old man, but his appearance was obviously white, and his clothes were also in the style of the Pantheon world. "That's right, and you are?" Ji Yunan's voice was very calm, and his tone was also very indifferent. He did not look too enthusiastic. The old man did not mind, and said with a smile, "You can call me Old Hank. I'm from the Saint Gervais continent, but I often go to the Pantheon world, so I usually spend more time there. There were astral lords like Taoist Spirit Sun who stayed in the Pantheon world for a long time, and in turn, there were also gods who went to the Pantheon world. However, this Old Hank was not a god. He was just an ordinary legendary powerhouse." Faced with Old Hank's self-introduction, Ji Yunan only nodded lightly, and had no intention of continuing the conversation. It was Yi Wu who hurriedly introduced himself, but he only addressed Ji Yunan as his teacher. Chapter 484. Reading. Perhaps it was because of Yi Wu's background that Old Hank misunderstood Ji Yunan's identity. He thought that Ji Yunan was also from the Dongshu heaven, so even the way he addressed Ji Yunan was a little strange. This Taoist priest. Old Hank had a respectful smile on his face. His pronunciation of the word Taoist was not very accurate. "What business do you have in Saint Gervais? Maybe I can be of some help." Ji Yunan didn't want to pay attention to him at first, but since the old man came up to him, he didn't mind using him to hide his identity. "We just want to go to the Temple of Scholars to look up some information." There was nothing to nitpick about this answer. Out of the 10 outsiders who went to St. Gervais, at least 6 of them were heading for the Shrine of Scholars. Old Hank wasn't surprised by this. Apparently, he had already expected this. He said, "It just so happens that Old Hank knows a few priests from the Temple of Scholars. Why don't I lead the way for you?" Ji Nan agreed with a faint smile. Just as Ji Nan was heading towards the Pantheon world once more, the Divine God Society was faced with a difficult problem. Shui Ren's whereabouts were unknown, and the Grand Sage Immortal Empress was busy tidying up her Broken Star realm. Only Zhuangxian was left by Elder Zi Luo's side. However, with Zhuangxian's ability, it was more than enough for him to handle all kinds of matters by himself. It was just that he really couldn't handle this matter this time. Lorenza sent a message, hoping that the Celestial Assembly would expel Ji Nan. Otherwise, she would voluntarily withdraw from the Celestial Assembly. To put it simply, it was as if there was only one of them. The content of the communication was very long. It emphasized the danger of the evil gods and that Ji Nan would definitely cause the world to collapse in the future. If the heavenly gods didn't try to kill him, then at least they couldn't take him in. What exactly is an evil god? Zhuangxian frowned and said, "I've looked up a lot of information, but there's never been any mention of such an existence. However, many people who are still alive say that they've heard of related legends." Old man Zi Luo didn't find it strange and said calmly, "The heretic god's words don't fall into words and are only passed down by word of mouth. This is a rule that only existed in ancient times. They believe that using words to write evil gods will cause evil to descend." Hearing this, Zhuangxian could only shake his head and remain silent. If there was a major difference between a Star Lord and a god, it would be that in the system of a god, mysticism was more important, to the point that even a lord would be affected. Gods would believe in fate, believe in ancient legends, and even believe that the older one was, the more powerful they were. In the world of gods, this was complete nonsense. For example, the first and second generation sages of ancient times would definitely not be a match for modern Dao integration stage cultivators in a real fight. This was a complete suppression of the Dao integration stage cultivators in terms of vision, methods, and rules. Since the evil god couldn't come to a conclusion, Zhuangxian began to seriously consider the situation. He suggested, "The core of the Divine God Association is still you. I think it's best not to respond to this matter. What if Lorenza insists on leaving the Celestial God Council?" Old man Zi Luo asked with a chuckle. "Then make her quit." Zhuangxian said without hesitation, "Even if we force her to stay, she will not cooperate with senior Ji Nan in the future. However, after this, we still have to find an opportunity to have senior Ji Nan withdraw from the organization." Zhuangxian was very clear that Lorenza was definitely not an exception. In fact, she was only a representative of the Divine God Council. As long as Ji Nan was in the Divine God Council, it would be impossible for the Divine God Council to have a sense of belonging. And without the support of the Divine God Council, the word God in the name would be unworthy of the name. Old man Zi Luo sighed softly. "What we want is a complete organization, not a single person. I'll leave this matter to you." Yes. The Scholar Temple was actually very easy to find. In other words, the Scholar Temple could be found everywhere on the St. Gervais continent. It wasn't just a single temple, but the knowledge within it was unified. In more modern terms, it was a huge database with countless terminals all over the continent. Any one of them could be accessed and queried. Daoist priest, misty, this is the Scholar Temple I mentioned. Old Hank led Ji Nan and Yi Zichen all the way until they found a temple in the corner of a small rural town. This temple was really a bit shabby, and even 2 of the pillars in front of the door were broken. In other words, a temple placed in such a place shouldn't be expected to be very luxurious. Yi Wu looked at Old Hank with a strange gaze, causing the latter to look slightly embarrassed and hurriedly explain. Old Hank has been staying in the heavenly world for the past 2 years. In the past, this place was quite popular. However, the books in the Scholar Temple are all connected, so it's the same to look for information anywhere. It's fine. Ji Yunan waved his hand. Of course, he knew that the Scholar Temple's database was connected, and he had originally hoped to find such a small place. Old Hank did indeed know the priest of this temple, and the priest here seemed to be very easy to talk to. Soon, he let Ji Yunan and Yi Zichen in. This was also related to the God of Knowledge. The previous gods of knowledge had opened the temple to the public, and anyone could visit and look up information. This time, Ji Yunan didn't choose to directly kill his way in. On one hand, he had a lot of time now, so he didn't need to pursue extreme efficiency. On the other hand, he didn't want to expose himself too early. If he killed someone in the temple, even if Jones couldn't track his whereabouts, he would be the first to discover him. Daoist priest, what kind of information are you looking for? Ancient myths and epics. Ji Yunan replied casually. In the ancient times of the world of gods, there was no such thing as historical records. There were only myths and epics left behind. Oh. Old Hank nodded repeatedly, and then he thought hard. If it's ancient myths, it should be at Inferior Legend District 19, this way. Ji Yunan knew the way, so he directly led the way. Yi Wu naturally followed quickly. Old Hank looked surprised. Daoist priest, you've been to the Scholar Temple before? Ji Yunan just nodded and didn't say anything. Most of the players' understanding of the game world came from the Scholar Temple. Even Ji Yunan often came here to inquire about it. After all, there was too much information in the game's background. It was impossible for experts to stuff all the information in their heads. They were only good at finding the most needed information. Ji Yunan didn't stop. He flipped through several pieces of information in a row, and the results were no different from what he remembered. Old Hank couldn't help but sneak a glance. He found that the information Ji Yunan was looking at was all related to the First War of the Gods. He suddenly felt a little more confident. This Daoist priest was most likely interested in the history of the world of gods, so, who is this god of dusk? Ji Yunan suddenly stopped what he was doing and pointed to a name on a dossier. He was sure that in his memory, there was absolutely no god of dusk. It should be a certain ancient god. Old Hank said, not understanding the situation. He was just a mortal, so he didn't have a deep understanding of the gods. Chapter 485. Read. The person who appeared in front of Ji Yunan and the others was an old man in a priest's robe. Strangely, his appearance was exactly the same as Old Hank's. But although they were both old men, Old Hank looked like a weathered merchant who was constantly on the move, while this person had a different kind of spirit. His whole person seemed to be in high spirits. Even though they looked the same, anyone who had seen the two of them would not be able to mistake them for someone else. Are you twins? Yi Wu looked at the two curiously. He looked at Old Hank, then at the old priest. Old Hank looked helpless. That's right, this is my brother. You can call him Hank. Both of you are called Hanks. Yi Wu clearly did not understand the culture of the Pantheon world, so he did not understand why there were two Hanks in the same scene. I am Old Hank emphasized. Priest Hank was not affected by the conversation between the two. He kept his eyes on Ji Yunan. Young man, you haven't answered my question. Ji Yunan did not rush to answer. He looked at the priest and asked, are you Jones' oracle? Jones was the god of knowledge of this generation. To be able to appear in the Temple of Scholars dressed like a priest, he was most likely an oracle. When the old priest saw that Link had called a god by his name, anger flashed across his face. However, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, who are you, Your Excellency? Ji Yunan retracted his gaze and continued to read the information. He had no interest in talking to a mere oracle. An extra god of dusk that appeared out of nowhere in the epic novels. Even an oracle would notice this, which meant that Jones had long known that there was a problem here. But was it just an extra god of dusk? Ji Yunan flipped through the records of that year one by one. It was not just the First Divine War, but the entire history of the Pantheon world. However, there was no second god of dusk with such obvious differences. After all, Ji Yunan had only played games in his previous life. He had not done systematic research, so it was impossible for him to remember all the history. For example, In a certain battle during the Second Divine War, how could anyone remember whether 4 or 5 gods had fallen? When the players entered the game, it was already after the 4th God's War. I'll have to start with the God of Dusk. Ji Nan made a decision since he could not find any other clues. Since such a god had appeared out of nowhere, he would be able to find some clues by following his life story and investigating the descendants he left behind. Ji Nan began to search for more information about the God of Dusk. He needed to find more information, but his efficiency was higher. Because he found that the God of Dusk had a biography. In the modern era, the world of Pantheon also had the existence of history books and the like, especially with the rise of the wizard faction among the mortals, which made them extremely interested in researching the stories of the gods. Most of the mags were non-believers. Some of the fanatics even shouted slogans such as "God is just a slightly more powerful mage." In particular, theologians would write biographies of famous and unknown gods, searching for their life stories for later generations to analyze. However, while Ji Nan was busy investigating the God of Dusk, Priest Hank was a little embarrassed because he had been ignored by Ji Nan. "Your Excellency." Priest Hank suppressed his anger and looked straight at Ji Nan. However, before he could speak again, a shadow hand stretched out from the back of the temple and directly dragged Priest Hank into the shadows. In order to prevent Jones from noticing, Ji Nan did not kill him directly this time. Instead, he dragged him into the shadows before killing him. In this way, in the perception of the God of Knowledge, this oracle had simply disappeared inexplicably. By the time they found out that it was Ji Nan, who knew how long it would take? Daoist priest. Old Hank suddenly roared, his eyes wide open. No matter what, Priest Hank was still his brother. "Oh, there's one more." Ji Nan raised his head from the dossier and looked at Old Hank. Thus, the shadow hand appeared again. When Old Hank was also dragged into the shadows, the library area of the Temple of Scholars became quiet. Only Yi Wu's small face was pale as he followed behind Ji Nan. Even though he had heard of Lord Ji Nan's ruthlessness before he left, he was still surprised that he would lay his hands on ordinary people despite his cultivation realm. It was really hard to imagine. Was this also what the Patriarch wanted me to learn? Yi Wu, who was wholeheartedly studying the posture, thought so. After all, these days, Yi Wu had realized that what Ji Nan had said back then was not false. This person really played all day and never practiced. This was a very incredible thing. Even people like Yu Lian and Song Fei needed to revise and consolidate their strength from time to time. Otherwise, they might fall behind. This was because the understanding of the rules could never reach the level of 100%. It was just a process of infinitely approaching the truth. Of course, Ji Nan did not believe in this. He only knew that the fist was the truth. "Let's go." After looking for a while, Ji Nan looked up and said to Yi Wu, Where do we go next?" Yi Wu came back to his senses from his deep thoughts and hurriedly asked. New Moon City. New Moon City was on the St. Gervais continent. It was located in the east of the continent, and it was quite a famous city. Its fame came from when the city was built. New Moon City was independent from a few big empires. It was built by a group of magicians. So, New Moon City was also known as the Magic City. The highest political organization there was the Magic Union. When Ji Nan and Yi Wu arrived at New Moon City, it was already 3 days after they left the Scholar Temple of Scholars. In fact, with Yi Wu's break world power, if the two of them wanted to speed up their journey, it would not take that long. But Ji Nan did not seem to be pursuing the fastest speed. Instead, he walked over like he was on a vacation. After arriving at New Moon City, Ji Nan said to Yi Wu, "Let's go see an old friend first." Yi Wu did not have any objections, so the two of them walked into a small restaurant. Before anyone came up to greet them, someone in a corner waved at them. "Your taste now is a bit behind the times." Ji Nan walked to the corner and looked at the person's clothes. Right now, the only person who could meet Ji Nan in the Pantheon world was naturally Taoist Spirit Sunday. As long as the gods saw Ji Nan, they would definitely attack him as a group. No, it was time to call for help. Compared to his old, rustic appearance, the Spirit Sun Master was now doing as the Romans do. It was almost impossible to tell that he was from the God world. Chapter 486. Read. Senior Ling Yang. Yi Wu bowed respectfully. Obviously, she had known Daoist Ling Yang for a long time. Ji Yunan looked at the two of them and couldn't help but laugh. You two know each other? She used to learn from Shui Ren for a while, Daoist Ling Yang said without hesitation. Ji Yunan knew that Shui Ren and Yu Lian had a good relationship. Yi Wu nodded and said, Senior Shui is a very good teacher. As a very special existence in the grotto void heaven, Yi Wu had learned from many teachers. Shui Ren, who was a star lord with a unique nomological principle and a good relationship with the grotto void heaven, naturally couldn't escape from the claws of the devil. As one of the three oldest heaven-grade astral realms, the grotto void heaven was still standing today for a reason. There were many people in the astral realm who had their own duties. Yi Wu wasn't the only one who specialized in learning the essence of each clan and then fed it back to the sect. Let's talk about the past later. Ji Yunan interrupted their conversation. How's the information I asked you to find? Daoist Ling Yang looked away from Yi Wu and replied, the God of Dusk. I asked someone to check, and it's indeed the same as the information you gave me. But it seems that he's just a very ordinary god. According to the information Ji Yunan found, the God of Dusk was active after the First War of the Gods, and he suddenly disappeared before the Second War of the Gods. However, when he looked into the specific history of the God of Dusk, he didn't do anything earth-shattering. Basically, they had participated in a certain battle with a few gods, or they had intervened in a certain battle and stopped the enemy's offensive. In Ji Yunan's words, it didn't matter if he was there or not, so the history after that was not affected much. Also, based on his battle record, the God of Dusk was roughly around the 7th or 8th stage, so he couldn't be considered a real top god. This person was definitely not the Grandmaster that Yu Lian mentioned. This was to be expected. It was very unlikely for a clash between overgods to be recorded by mortals. Overall, the God of Dusk was just as Daoist Ling Yang said, a very ordinary god. Ji Yunan shook his head and said, but this ordinary god shouldn't exist in the first place. Daoist Spirit Yang was stunned, not understanding what Ji Yunan meant. Of course, he couldn't figure out what Ji Yunan's true intentions were, but he himself came from the heavenly worlds, so he had other ideas. Are you saying that he came from the all heavens? Daoist Spirit Sun frowned slightly. As far as I know, there should have been very little communication between the two sides. Oh, why? Ji Yunan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Daoist Spirit Yang's explanation was different from Yu Lian's. Taoist Spirit Sun answered, it was only after the collapse of the three ancient realms that the all heavens truly saw the outside world. It was also from then on that they gradually learned of the existence of the world of gods. However, during the era of the sages, the cultivators of the all heavens were very xenophobic. They viewed the world of gods as a barbarian outworld, so very few people were willing to come here. Ji Yunan nodded slowly. Combining the information from both sides, it turned out that ordinary cultivators were not willing to come here, but did the sages come here in the past? Ji Yunan could even boldly guess that the sages' sudden proposal to combine cultivators with the astral plane might have been inspired by the god nation. However, the all heavens naturally did not have the soil for the development of faith, so they were forced to make changes. Since you said that the God of Dusk might come from the all heavens, let's go and take a look, Daoist Spirit Yang said again, suddenly showing a lot of interest. This was because he had also taken this path and had recently begun to rebuild the astral plane. If he could learn from this path, it would undoubtedly be of great help. As soon as he finished speaking, Daoist Spirit Yang led the two of them out. New Moon City, City Lord's Mansion. The reason why Ji Yunan came to New Moon City was because he found out that the previous City Lord of New Moon City was a descendant of the God of Dusk. This was also the only trace of the God of Dusk on the Saint Gervais continent. Daoist Spirit Yang was obviously familiar with the City Lord's mansion. He directly entered a secret room, pointed to the front, and said, the City Lord's secret vault is behind it. I think he used his own blood to open it. Do you have any other way? Boom. Before he finished speaking, Ji Yunan had already punched the wall. Countless magic waves flashed, and the whole wall instantly collapsed. Yes. Ji Yunan's reply came late. Daoist Spirit Yang shrugged his shoulders. We have to hurry. The movement of the wall collapsing would undoubtedly attract other people. But it did not matter, because the city lord could not have not noticed that the restriction had been destroyed. Ji Yunan took the lead and walked in. His eyes quickly wandered through the countless treasures, but he did not stop at all. Master, this bead seems to have some mysterious aura. Yi Wu quickly found something and ran over to present a treasure. However, Ji Yunan just glanced at it and said immediately, the blood bead of the nine-headed serpent emperor is not very useful. This city lord even has something like this, is not simple. The nine-headed serpent emperor was already a level 5 creature. It was not something an ordinary legendary powerhouse could kill. Oh! Yi Wu lowered her head and turned to look for more treasures. She sincerely wanted to help, but Ji Yunan did not need it. With Ji Yunan's understanding of the world of God's treasures, a pair of eyes was definitely more useful than appraisal. Ji Yunan's footsteps did not stop, and he walked into the depths of the treasure vault in a few steps. Countless boxes were swept by shadow energy, and all the restrictions were broken in an instant, revealing the treasures hidden within. Only when he saw a strange talisman did Ji Yunan suddenly stop in his tracks. Look at this. Ji Yunan picked up the talisman and handed it to Daoist Spirit Yang. Daoist Spirit Yang looked down and saw that the talisman was very shabby, but the veined patterns on it gave him a sense of familiarity. This is something from the world of gods. Daoist Spirit Yang did not hesitate and immediately made a judgment. He was familiar with the styles of the two worlds, and the natives of the world of gods would definitely not be able to make this kind of talisman. But the materials are from this side. Ji Yunan said, this means that this is a talisman made here by someone from the world of gods. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately activated the talisman. However, Ji Yunan couldn't help but be surprised by the scene that followed. A force flashed past, like a sharp arrow shooting straight at Ji Yunan's face. It instantly broke through the automatic defense of shadow energy, and directly pierced through the space between Ji Yunan's eyebrows. Daoist Spirit Yang's expression changed in an instant, and he quickly retreated. He could not help but break out in a cold sweat, and with great difficulty, he spat out 2 words, Lord. Yi Wu was still in a daze, not understanding what had happened until a shadow appeared in front of her. Chapter 487. Read. Strange ripples spread through the air. Yi Wu felt as if some kind of power was sweeping through her, instantly projecting everything about her to the outside world. All of her secrets were laid bare for all to see. The next moment, a strong sense of danger rose in Yi Wu's heart. It was as if someone was holding a knife to her neck and could take her life at any time. The intermittent voice was still echoing, die, die. Yi Wu was enveloped by a terrifying power, unable to move. She could only watch helplessly as the ripples turned into a human figure, holding a sickle and swiftly chopping down on her head. In the face of a Lord God, Yi Wu had no way of resisting at all. She could only look at Ji Yunan. Could this newly advanced converged path cultivator? As far as her eyes could see, Ji Yunan, whose forehead had been pierced, had long since disappeared. However, just as the rippled figure was about to land its sickle, a hand suddenly reached out from behind and directly crushed the figure's head. Death! Doesn't seem like it. Ji Yunan's figure reappeared, his eyes filled with hesitation. He sensed a Lord God-level death maxim in the other person's maxim, but it was also very different from the death he remembered. It should not be that person. Not a lord here. It doesn't seem like a converged path cultivator either. Taoist Spirit Sun had already returned to the vicinity. He sensed that the person's aura had already disappeared. Yi Wu recovered from her shocked state and stammered, I've seen that kind of power, are you serious? Taoist Spirit Sun suddenly turned his head and stared directly at Yi Wu. Yi Wu was startled and hurriedly nodded. I once sensed a similar aura on an antique. It was a long sword left behind by the Death Monarch. The Death Monarch? Ji Yunan turned to look at Taoist Spirit Sunday. He did not have any impression of this name, so he should not be from the Pantheon world. However, this name had the style of the Pantheon world. It did not sound like someone from the celestial world. Taoist spirit Sun frowned slightly. I know this person. He was a Star Lord during the period of the second-generation sages, a rather famous pioneer of the astral world. His strength had barely reached the realm level. The era of the second sage was the period of the largest expansion of the star boundary in the history of the heavens. A large number of Star Lords gave up their original path of cultivation and embarked on the path of cultivation in the star boundary. Due to the large amount of resources available for plundering, the Star Lord route had a huge advantage in the past, so there were many Star Lords who participated in the development of the star realms. The fact that the King of the Dead was able to stand out among so many people and leave behind a considerable reputation showed that his abilities were not ordinary. Daoist Spirit Yang pondered for a moment and said, if he's still alive, it's not impossible for him to advance to the Dao integration realm. But where exactly did he advance to the Dao integration realm? It was virtually impossible for sovereigns or Dao merge practitioners to remain completely undetected. Dao integration referred to the fusion of one's body and laws. Therefore, other people who were also Dao integration practitioners would naturally be able to sense this process. There were only two possibilities for a completely unknown Dao integration stage being to appear. Either he had some kind of secret technique to conceal his Dao integration process, or he was undergoing Dao integration in another world. It was just like how old man Zi Luo had advanced in the world of gods. Naturally, Dao integration practitioners from other worlds would not be able to discover him. We'll know once we find him. Ji Nan did not say anything else. He pressed a hand against the talisman and activated it once more. The wound between his brows had already healed completely, as if it had not been affected in the slightest. Those who discover me must die. The exact same voice rang out again. A ripple-like power spread out once more, and another sharp arrow shot towards Ji Nan. An incomparably dense shadow materialized and blocked the sharp arrow. Meanwhile, the humanoid figure formed by the ripples was grabbed by Ji Nan. The scythe slashed down heavily, hitting Ji Nan's neck with unerring accuracy. However, Ji Nan did not even flinch. Instead, the scythe instantly disintegrated and dissipated into nothingness. This talisman was clearly a passively activated tool. Only when it received an external force would it respond in a programmed manner. Ji Nan mobilized his shadow power and began to search in all directions, following the death ripples. As long as the other party was still in this world, the aura of a lord would be like a bright lamp. There was no way to hide. But in the end, there was none. He's not in the world of gods. Ji Nan frowned and said to Taoist Spirit Sun, we're preparing to return. We can't hide the fight here from others. Soon, a lord will be here. Of course, it was impossible for no one to notice a fight between lords. Taoist Spirit Sun also understood this. He immediately nodded and quickly disappeared. He dared not let others discover that he was related to Ji Nan. Otherwise, he would no longer have a place in the world of gods. After Taoist Spirit Sun disappeared, Yiwu looked at Ji Nan and asked, Lord Ji Nan, are we going back now? She had heard Ji Nan's words earlier. At the same time, she also knew that he was not in the world of gods. It was very likely that they would have to return to the world of gods to search for him. Wait, there's still one more thing. New Moon City, Temple of Scholars. Esteemed Lord, a young female priest stood in front of Ji Nan. The Temple of Scholars is in front, please, bang. Without thinking, Ji Nan punched out, and the priest immediately exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Yi Wu, who was behind him, twitched her mouth, but did not say anything in the end. Ji Nan walked forward slowly, heading straight for the library area of the Temple of Scholars. His trip here was, of course, for the information in the Temple of Scholars. There were many files that Ji Nan did not have the time to read in detail. The best way was, of course, to move all the information back to the God Kingdom. Under normal circumstances, this was, of course, impossible. The information in the Temple of Scholars was extremely precious. Even if one wanted to read it, one had to pay a considerable price, or go through the back door like old Hank. And the reason why the God of Knowledge was able to keep so much information was because he had made the information public. Anyone could borrow it and read it. Otherwise, he would have long been targeted by people with ulterior motives. It was also because of this that no one had ever dared to have any ideas about this information. Doing so would be tantamount to going against the collective of the gods and truly provoking public anger. Only Ji-Yunan did not care about this, because he was the public enemy of the gods. In fact, in the game, after players reached the second job transition stage, this kind of thing was very common. Anyway, they were already enemies with the whole world, so who would care so much? There were players who liked to play the pig to eat the tiger, waiting to be exposed and looking for excitement. Naturally, there were also players who were unscrupulous and stirred up trouble everywhere. Ji-Yunan's wanton massacre in the temple naturally attracted the attention of the god of knowledge. This god, who had been getting stronger every generation, immediately descended. The statue of the god flickered with light, and a miracle appeared. Chapter 488. Read. Sinners, I will punish. Before the god of knowledge Jones could finish his declaration, Ji-Yunan had already sent a flying kick at the statue's abdomen. The entire statue was instantly torn into pieces, and the descending light of God dissipated. Jones' aura suddenly disappeared without a trace. He did not even dare to let out a fart. The entire temple was completely engulfed in shadows. Jones' oracles felt as if they had fallen into hell. Before they could rejoice at the appearance of the miracle, it had already disappeared. Of course, they did not understand that Jones was now rejoicing that he did not rush to descend with his real body. Instead, he only sent a clone. As long as the other party did not chase him to his god kingdom, he would only lose a small part of his divinity. It was not a serious injury. This was the main god-level evil god. The moment the other party made a move, Jones had already seen through the identity of the other party. If he had descended with his real body, he might have died in an instant. I must contact Austin immediately. Jones did not hesitate and immediately made a decision. Regardless of what the god of knowledge was doing, Ji-Yunan was happily doing the moving. After slaughtering a scholar temple, he directly transported the scrolls from the terminal here and temporarily stored them in a temporarily opened space, ready to bring them back to the God Kingdom. There was a lot of information in the Scholar Temple, but Ji-Yunan's movement was also very fast, almost sweeping them in batches. After a short while, Austin directly descended on St. Gervais continent, the endless holy light almost burning the laws. Escaped. The Lady of Darkness Daisy walked out from the side and looked at the mess of the Scholar Temple, frowning slightly. This was probably the first time the leaders of the light and darkness god systems had worked together for the same goal, without the slightest bit of disloyalty. Something was left behind. Austin's eyes moved slightly, and the holy light enveloped the entire temple. Soon, he fished out a note from it. There were twisted shadows on the note, forming a line of words. Austin, go back and see your sister. Lord Ji-Yunan, when did you do it? On the starship returning to the heavenly worlds, Yiwu could not help but ask curiously. Do what? Austin's sister. Yiwu naturally saw the contents of the note. Ji-Yunan pursed his lips and said, I lied to him. Let him be suspicious for a while. Next time when we really want to make a move, we might be able to trick him. Huh. Yiwu's jaw dropped. He couldn't help but mutter, that's the mighty chief god of light. In Yiwu's opinion, Austin, who was equivalent to a top-rate Dao integration stage cultivator, shouldn't be so easily deceived. Ji-Yunan, however, knew very well that although sovereigns were powerful, they weren't invincible. On the other hand, almost all of these gods had personality flaws because they had achieved their path through the power of faith. Austin's flaw was that he didn't let go of any suspicious points. To put it nicely, it was watertight. To put it bluntly, it was being paranoid. By the time he returned, even if he found that Sylvia was uninjured, he would suspect that Ji-Yunan had secretly left something on Sylvia's body, waiting to detonate it at the most crucial moment. There was no need to explain all this to Yiwu. Ji-Yunan was currently tossing the talisman in his hand. He was very interested in this tool created by the chief god. This tool came from the King of Death during the period of the second-generation saint. Be it the heavens or the gods, there didn't seem to be such a Dao integration stage cultivator. However, what was certain was that this king was definitely still alive. Otherwise, The power of the talisman wouldn't be able to be repeatedly activated. He's really in the heavens? How did he conceal himself? Ji Yunan looked at the starry sky outside the window as he pondered. They were currently at the gap between the two great worlds and were about to enter the heavens. Wait. Ji Yunan seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He grabbed the talisman abruptly and channeled his power into it, directly triggering the power of the talisman. Anyone who discovers me must die. This time, Ji Yunan was very familiar with the process. Before the ripple of death formed, the shadow law had already engulfed it completely. He didn't give the other party any chance to attack at all. This time, when he followed the law of death to search, he unexpectedly received a response. He was really here. This king of death who had created the talisman was not in the world of gods, nor was he in the heavens. Instead, he was in the gap between the two great worlds. Could it be that he had completed his Tao integration here? Perhaps this was the real reason why no one had discovered that there was a Tao integration stage cultivator hidden in this world. Just as Ji Yunan activated the death talisman this time, an aura had already risen from the depths of the starry sky and quickly descended near the starship. However, this aura was extremely well hidden. Other than Ji Yunan, who was holding the talisman, no one else could sense it. I'm going out for a while. Ji Yunan casually threw down these words, and his figure suddenly disappeared, leaving Yi Wu alone. Poor Yi Wu. Originally, she had agreed to follow Ji Yunan, but when the latter didn't want to bring her along, there was nothing she could do. Ji Yunan stood in the void, looking at the figure that had suddenly appeared in front of him. However, there was no surprise on his face. This person was dressed in a long grey robe. Under the hood was an ordinary appearance, and there were even a few wrinkles on his face. The King of Death. The Dusk God. Ji Yunan raised his eyebrows and said directly, "Looks like you know me very well, Daoist Ji Yunan." The grey-robed person revealed a strange smile and then gave a standard ancient bow. The other party didn't deny it. The Dusk God and the King of Death were actually the same person. This person knew Ji Yunan's identity, so Ji Yunan wasn't surprised. The other party was only hiding in the gap between the two realms. It wasn't like he knew nothing about the outside world. Ji Yunan could almost imagine that this was a cultivator from the heavenly world who had shone during the development of the astral world. After that, he personally came to the world of gods and had the identity of a god. However, very few people on both sides knew that these two were the same person. However, when his strength gradually improved and he was close to Tao integration, he suddenly disappeared for some reason and then completed Tao integration in the gap between the two realms. All of this flashed through Ji Yunan's mind. He looked at the grey-robed person and said, "Am I the first person to discover you?" "You can say that." The grey-robed person nodded and said, "Some people discovered me before, and then they all." "Yes, they belong to me. They didn't die. They belonged to him." Ji Yunan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Please come with me." The grey-robed person smiled and said, "Daoist Ji Yunan, you should feel lucky. You will be the second Tao integration person to know this secret." Chapter 489. Reading. Genius in 1 second. Live in. Di Chulwan. Champagne. Duan Duan. City Duan Duan. Ji Yunan silently followed behind the grey-robed man, moving slowly through the gap between the two realms. The grey-robed man, or the King of Death, walked in front with a peaceful smile on his face, as if he did not mind sharing secrets with Ji Yunan. "You can call me Daoist Netherworld. That was my original title," the King of Death said. "My title in the Pantheon world should have been the God of the Yellow Springs, but those fellows don't understand the meaning of the Yellow Springs. You know that. There was no such thing as reincarnation in the Pantheon world, and there was no such thing as the Yellow Springs path. Therefore, in the continuous evolution of history, the God of Yellow Springs was misrepresented as the God of Dusk." Ji Yunan did not comment, clearly uninterested in such gossip. However, the Daoist Netherworld then smiled and said, "Come to think of it, we should be from the same place." These words finally made Ji Yunan turn around abruptly, and the Daoist Netherworld also happened to look in his direction. Their eyes met, but neither took a step back. The Daoist Netherworld also stopped at this time, in front of a world. Just as he said before, there was a third world in this world. This world was very small, so small that it was only the size of an ordinary plane, and it was a world that Ji Nan was very familiar with. Ji Nan slowly turned his head, and saw the familiar azure planet. With his current knowledge, this world should be described as a starry plane. On the whole, there did not seem to be anything special about it. Other than being located at the border of two major worlds, and having the evil god game on it. I don't know which planet you're from, or whose inheritance you've obtained, but things like evil gods should have long been extinct in the Pantheon world, so it can only be from here. The Daoist netherworld was very certain of this. Ji Nan's expression did not change, and only looked at the other and said, "From what you said, there are many people like us?" "Quite a few," the Daoist netherworld replied. "But there are very few who can reach our realm. Other than you and me, there's only Ju Po. Oh, there's someone who actually has a chance, but is not very lucky and is a little stupid. 9 spirits." Ji Nan raised his eyebrows and recalled that ordinary face. He then asked, "Who's the other one?" 0. Now, she should be made into a toy and placed in the heavenly world to be the king of the world, right? Daoist Huang Quan sneered. Ji Nan was slightly startled. It was not that Taoist Huang Quan's answer was beyond his expectation, but when he mentioned Zero's name, he finally recalled something from the past. When Ji Nan first met Zero, he felt a sense of familiarity, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. Now that he remembered it, it was an NPC that appeared very early in the game. He also claimed to be the king of the world, but he only appeared in a small expansion pack and then completely disappeared. Such a figure was so inconspicuous that Ji Nan couldn't even remember his existence until Taoist Netherworld mentioned the king of the world again. This NPC didn't have any important tasks, and his strength wasn't very strong. He was completely a side character. Unexpectedly. Could it be that Zero got his inheritance? Seeing that Ji Nan was silent, Daoist Netherworld didn't ask further. He just said again, "What Ju Po and I got are all information about the heavenly world. And you should be the same as Zero, from the world of gods." "Yes, but something happened when I left here, and I went to the heavenly world." Ji Nan looked up at him and said with a smile. With Ji Nan's current vision, he could already see the uniqueness of this crack world without Daoist Netherworld's explanation. The crack world was where he was in his previous life. It was a small world independent of the two major worlds, but it had the power to reflect all the information of the two major worlds. It could even calculate and evolve on its own. Ju Po left the crack world in ancient times and got the information of the heavenly world at the same time. That was why he could seize the essence of the land. Daoist Netherworld was the same, but he left much later than Ju Po, and faced the era of the great development of the astral world. As for Zero, she was really unlucky. She got a side character NPC template, so she didn't take the last step and became the inner world manager of the heavenly world. The evil god game in his previous life was essentially a projection of the world of gods. It was just that what he had obtained was an unprecedented evil god player template. According to Daoist Netherworld, there were actually many people who left the crack world. Some went to the heavenly world, and some went to the world of gods. Some of them might have died, some were still quietly lurking, or some had already risen, but Meng Qi and the others didn't know. Slowly withdrawing his gaze from the crack world, Ji Nan looked at Daoist Netherworld and said, "You chose to converge here because you want to see the uniqueness of this world." "That's not true." Daoist Netherworld waved his hand and smiled. "I'm naturally afraid of death. I'm the only one converging in this world. Isn't it safer than any other place?" He converged in the crack world, and no one in the two worlds knew of his existence. Instead, he could go anywhere he wanted. He could attack and retreat at will. Daoist Netherworld saw that Meng Qi understood his meaning and said, "I'm sharing the secret here with you in the hope that you can also keep it a secret." "Okay." Ji Nan nodded. "But I want to enter the crack world to have a look." "That's up to you." Daoist Netherworld smiled again. "I'm just converging here. I'm not treating the crack world as my astral world." Ji Nan couldn't help but raise his head and look at him carefully. Only then did he confirm that he eventually took the path of the ancient sages. There was no astral world at all. In the era of Daoist Netherworld, the astral lord path was in a period of rise. Many people devoted themselves to it, and naturally, some people insisted on the original path. Daoist Netherworld had tried in both worlds, but in the end, he chose to only cultivate himself. He probably had his own understanding of it. Ji Nan nodded and didn't say anything more. His figure had already fled into the crack world. Even though he had understood some of his origins, there were still many doubtful points. For example, the people who left the crack world received their inheritance based on playing the evil god game, so they got the evil god template. This couldn't be a coincidence. Ji Nan actually didn't believe that the evil god game was created by some mighty figure. What kind of mighty figure gave good things to others and felt that his life was too comfortable? Anyway, he had to go and see for himself. After Ji Nan's figure disappeared, Daoist Netherworld also showed a strange smile, and his figure suddenly disappeared. Chapter 490. Read. Genius in 1 second. Live in. Di Chul 1. Champagne. Mound. City F. Disappeared. Why did they disappear? Yu Lian's face was gloomy as she questioned in a deep voice. She had just received the news that the starship carrying Ji Nan and Yi Wu had suddenly disappeared just before they reached the heavenly world. Everyone on the starship had disappeared without a trace. There were no signs that anyone had done anything. After all, that was the gap between the two realms. Even if a Dao-fusing cultivator or a lord made a move, they wouldn't be able to hide from anyone. A young man stood in front of Yu Lian, cold sweat dripping down his face. We're also investigating the cause. Our initial suspicion is that it's because of space-time turbulence. Ridiculous. Yu Lian slammed the table. Ji Nan is a Dao-fusing cultivator. Why would he care about space-time turbulence? Even an ordinary Star-Lord wouldn't disappear without warning. There was no way such a powerful space-time turbulence could exist in this world. The young man knew this very well, but they really couldn't find the reason. Yu Lian exhaled heavily. You can go now. If you find any traces of Ji Nan, inform me immediately. While the Dongshu heaven was in chaos, Ji Nan had already arrived at the familiar space-time. In this starry sky dimension, it wasn't difficult to find a familiar habitable planet. However, the world between the gaps seemed to have extremely special rules. Even a Dao-fusing cultivator like Ji Nan couldn't directly enter it. This was the same as the two major worlds being protected by the bit wall. However, the world between the gaps was more exclusive, and the space-time crystal core couldn't break through the space. Mansion. F. W. However, this wasn't a big problem. Ji Nan gave up the idea of entering it himself. He directly separated a wisp of his consciousness into the world between the gaps. With his current realm, he could keep this wisp of consciousness and even inherit part of the nomological power of his body. When Ji Nan arrived here, he found that this familiar land was no longer the spacetime he was familiar with. What year is it now? Federation calendar year 358. Not AD. AD. That's an old story from hundreds of years ago. Are you crazy for wanting to be reborn? Ji Nan stood in the middle of a steel jungle and asked a random passerby a few questions, but he got such an answer. Was it because the time flow in the world between the gaps was different? Or was it because he had stayed for hundreds of years? Ji Nan didn't know the reason, but at least he knew that everything he was familiar with had vanished into thin air. For a Dao integration cultivator like him, a few hundred years was nothing more than the blink of an eye. However, for a technological civilization, a few hundred years was enough for a civilization to evolve several times. Ji Nan wandered around the cerulean planet for a few more days, roughly understanding what had happened in the past few hundred years. The Third World War broke out, and the interstellar era arrived. Mars and the Moon were transformed into habitable planets, and humans began to step out of the solar system. Everything was clearly visible, and the epoch-making game from back then didn't leave any trace in the long river of history. In the eyes of this civilized person, perhaps it was just a popular game. Compared to the progress of the entire human civilization, it was nothing. But Ji Nan wasn't someone who would give up so easily. Mars, 9th Entertainment College of the Federation. In this interstellar world, the Blue Planet civilization had gradually developed some cultivation systems from a purely technological civilization. The Federation promoted a basic cultivation method called force. It called on all people to cultivate in order to improve the overall quality of the people. However, there were still very few people who could become strong. Most people only wanted to strengthen their bodies, so there were still a large number of people who devoted themselves to other industries. Entertainment colleges, technical colleges, and other places were the products of this situation. Professor Wang, I'm Ji Yunan. I called you yesterday. Professor Wang was a stout middle-aged man. When he saw Ji Yunan, he quickly got up and greeted him with a smile. Mr. Ji Yu, hello. Professor Wang was a research expert in the development of console games. Ji Yunan created a fake identity, disguised himself as a game investor, and arranged to meet him today. Hundreds of years of peaceful development were enough for the tertiary industry to develop to an astonishing level. The gaming industry had long been one of the pillars of the entertainment industry. Mr. Ji Yu, I heard you say on the phone that you wanted to understand the game Evil God. Yes. Ji Yunan nodded. Although it's an old game, I think many of the ideas in it are very meaningful. He stood in front of Professor Wang and spoke with confidence. The person who was possessed by Ji Yunan's consciousness was a young man who looked bright and outgoing. He was full of vitality. Professor Wang nodded in agreement. Evil God is the first virtual reality game in history that is completely realistic. If it wasn't for World War III, this game might have lived longer. As he spoke, he took a personal computer in front of him and passed it to Ji Yunan. This is the relevant information, I can look at it myself. Ji Yunan turned around and smiled, but said in an unquestionable tone. Professor Wang nodded in understanding. Game investors like Ji Yunan were actually considered as his clients. If the other party really wanted to develop a game, after getting the information from him, it was very likely that he would hire him as a project consultant. Professor Wang's office quieted down. Only the sound of Ji Yunan clicking the mouse could be heard. He looked at the information very quickly. Whether it was words or pictures, they were all scanned in one glance. This made Professor Wang think that he was not looking at the overall information, but was looking for something. Professor Wang. At this moment, a clear voice came from outside the door. A girl in a school uniform quickly ran in. Girls from the School of Entertainment were naturally of good quality. This girl had a pretty face and a good figure. Even the loose school uniform could not hide her figure. Wang Jiao. Hey, Jiao Ping, why are you here? After the girl walked into the office, she immediately noticed Ji Yunan's presence. She could not help but blurt out. As for what the original name of this body was, Ji Yunan had no idea at all. He had no interest in it at the moment. He did not even look at the girl. He was still focused on looking at the information. The information prepared by Professor Wang was quite detailed. The development process of the game, the awards it received, and even the developers and main creators were all there. Of course, it also included the game's plot and gameplay. Unfortunately, a few hundred years had passed. It was already impossible to find the person who designed the game's plot. What is the way to obtain the inheritance? The third level? This question flashed through Ji Yunan's mind. Let's give it a try. Professor Wang, I really like this game. Ji Yunan smiled. I want to use this as a blueprint to build a new game. What do you think? Professor Wang thought for a moment and said, You want to make a remake of Evil God? Don't do such a suicidal thing. Ji Yunan patted his shoulder. Let's make a doujin expansion. The name is King of Pantheon, The Origin of Light. Chapter 491. Read. Genius 1 second. Live. Di Chul 1. Champagne. Mongdang. City F. The Blue Planet was just a planet in the crack world. People such as Ju Po and Huang Quan obviously did not come from here, but from other planets. Mansion. F. W. Ji Yunan had reason to believe that reflecting the current situation of the two worlds was the special nature of the entire crack world. Ji Yunan had reason to believe that the reflection of the current situation of the two worlds was the special nature of the entire crack world. In order to verify this speculation, The best way was, of course, to make another game, promote it on the blue planet, and let the modern players try it again. In order to verify this speculation, the best way was, of course, to make another game, promote it on the blue planet, and let the modern players try it again. However, Ji-Yunan was not stupid enough to create another evil god. Wouldn't that make things difficult for himself? Mr. Ji-Yunan, do you mean to change the perspective and restructure the game with the God of Light as the main line? Professor Wang seemed to understand what Ji-Yunan meant. He thought about it and said, "That's a good idea. The plot seems a bit old now, but the content is detailed. It will be a good choice to restructure and adapt it." No, there is no need to adapt it. Ji-Yunan decisively rejected Professor Wang's idea, and then said, "I don't have much time to stay here. I will look for you after this matter." After saying this, he immediately turned around and walked out of the office, ignoring what Professor Wang thought. Professor Wang had probably never seen such an impolite person who left without saying goodbye. He was a little stunned for a moment. However, the girl who walked in halfway seemed to have expected this, and quickly said, "Professor Wang, don't be fooled by him. An I Ching, do you know Mr. Ji-Yunan?" Professor Wang turned to look at An I Ching. Although it was a little strange that Ji-Yunan left without saying goodbye, Professor Wang was over 60 years old, and he had a good eye for people. The other party's temperament and speech were obviously not ordinary. "What, Mr. Ji-Yunan?" An I Ching said disdainfully. "His name is Zhao Ping. He's a hooligan wandering outside the academy. Many people in our academy know him." At this point, An I Ching could not help but ask, "Professor Wang, is he here to swindle money?" Professor Wang could not help but laugh. He waved his hand and said, "I'm just here to look up information about a game. What's there to lie about? And didn't he already leave? He must be feeling guilty because he saw me coming." An I Ching snorted. "Let's not talk about him." Professor Wang shook his head and smiled. "No matter what, the idea of reconstructing the game is not bad. It's worth doing." Ji-Yunan's consciousness withdrew from the crack world and returned to the void. Taoist Huang Quan was already waiting beside him. "How is it?" Daoist Netherworld smiled and said, "I heard that it has been less than 100 years since your debut. You can probably find the location of your home planet." Speaking of this, he laughed self-deprecatingly. "When I found this place, even the home planet civilization had disappeared. I couldn't benefit future generations even if I wanted to." Ji-Yunan shook his head and said, "The spatial laws here are almost completely fixed, and there is a special bit wall here. They can only do whatever they want." The bit wall completely sealed the crack world, so even Dao fusing experts like Ji-Yunan and Daoist Huang Quan could not enter, and it was difficult for them to affect the development of the world. For example, when Ji-Yunan separated a wisp of consciousness to enter it, it could still exist stably at first, and even linked with part of the laws of his main body. But after just a few days, he found that this wisp of consciousness was rapidly weakening, and the power of the laws was quickly disappearing. Even his 11th grade laws were facing this situation. It was almost impossible for anyone below Dao fusing, so there was no need to consider entering it. Daoist Huang Quan just shrugged. He was a carefree person by nature, and he did not have the burden of the astral realm. What he liked most was to play around in the human world, and no one could do anything to him anyway. Ji-Yunan looked at him again and said, "You said that when you and Ju Po left the crack, you got some information about the heavenly realms. How did you get this information?" "I talked to Ju Po." As a kindred, Daoist Huang Quan did not intend to hide it. Ju Po read the ancient history of the heavenly realms in a book, and he showed a strange smile. "You may not believe it, but I transmigrated while watching TV. That TV show was about the era of the astral realm development. When the era of the astral realm development ended and the TV show ended, it was also the time I left the crack." Ji-Yunan narrowed his eyes slightly. "Ju Po too?" Daoist Huang Quan shook his head. "I don't know. But I also suspect that he left the crack after he finished reading his book." Ji-Yunan was silent for a moment. He originally thought that the crack world reflected the two major worlds, and at the same time, it had some deduction functions, which allowed him to predict some of the future development of the world of gods. But judging from the situation of Daoist Huang Quan and Ju Po, this kind of foresight seemed to be universal. And when the foresight ended, it was the day they left the crack. He suddenly transmigrated when he completed his third profession and advanced to the 16th rank. In other words, his foresight process only lasted until then. But at the same time, Ji Yunan also knew that he was not the first player to complete the third profession, because he had failed many times before reaching this step. There must be someone ahead of him. By the way, Ji Yunan seemed to suddenly think of something and turned to look at Daoist Huang Quan. Is there Ju Po in the TV show you watched? Daoist Huang Quan's expression became strange, as if he was praising Ji Yunan for finally thinking of this. Yes. He stared into Ji Yunan's eyes and said, "You're right. We people see history, and then we become a part of it. God's kingdom." Ji Yunan sat alone on the throne. There was no sound in the empty hall, and no light could penetrate it. It was as if there was only him and darkness left in the world. Ju Po is a book, Daoist Huang is a TV show, and I am a game. Daoist Huang saw everything Ju Po did. The NPC representing Zero disappeared because she was taken to the world of heavens. Ji Yunan sketched in his mind bit by bit, trying to piece together the rules of the crack world. There are still not enough examples. He sighed softly. Now there were only 4 known examples, and they were divided into 2 worlds. It would be great if there were other examples to support it. But except for those who had entered the realm of Dao integration, how many people from the crack world were willing to reveal their origins? Investigating the nature of the crack world became another thing that Ji Yunan had to do, but it was not something that could be done in a short time. In addition, Ji Yunan also needed to continue to improve his strength. He had a hunch that when he advanced to the 16th rank, he might be able to find the truth behind everything. Chapter 492. Read. Genius in 1 second. Live in Di Cho Boluan, Champagne, Lang Dang, City Dang. Where's little Wu? Yu Lian appeared in front of Ji Yunan. The darkness in the evil god's palace seemed to be unable to obstruct her vision. Yi Wu disappeared. She knew that there was another Lord God in this world, and she was still in the crack, so she had to die. Daoist Huang Quan wouldn't let her go. However, he would not kill Yi Wu either. That would only lead to people following the cause and effect of his death and directly finding him. The Hollow Heaven naturally had a way to confirm whether Yi Wu was dead or alive. Although her life lamp hadn't been extinguished, they still couldn't find any trace of her, which made Yu Lian confused. Ji Yunan was silent for a while. Even you can't find her? If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have come here today. Yu Lian suppressed her anger and said, she disappeared when we were about to reach the All Heavens. Weren't you there at that time? Ji Yunan shook his head. I left halfway, and no one from the gods did anything. If she disappeared at the All Heavens gate, I think you need to look back. Of course, he was referring to the inside of the All Heavens. Even though he knew who the culprit was, it didn't stop Ji Yunan from deliberately misleading Yu Lian because he also didn't want the crack world to be exposed. Yu Lian looked at Ji Yunan deeply, as if she was trying to determine whether he was telling the truth or not. However, Ji Yunan, who was possessed by Oscar, was expressionless and didn't reveal any flaws. After Yu Lian left, Yang Xiaoxiao's voice slowly sounded. Teacher. Her voice sounded a little light, but it also seemed a little funny. I was just thinking, if I cooperate with teacher, can we make her stay? Ji Yunan laughed. You're very arrogant now. You want to kill a Dao integration stage Star-Lord? Ever since Ji Yunan completed his 2nd rank, although his divine kingdom didn't expand out of thin air, its essence was rapidly improving. In terms of core, Ji Yunan's divine kingdom was no weaker than other Dao integration stage planes. With this as a foundation, Yang Xiaoxiao was naturally strengthened considerably as well. I just have some thoughts. Yang Xiaoxiao appeared and said. Ji Yunan shook his head. It's still too early to think about this. Even if we do make a move, we should make a move on the Pantheon world first. Yu Lian's thoughts were none of Ji Yunan's business. Yi Wu wanted to see how Taoist Netherworld dealt with him, and it was none of Ji Yunan's business. At this time, Ji Yunan was already thinking about how to produce and promote games in the crack world. Fu Cheng was already 42 years old this year. She married her ex-husband at the age of 20, gave birth to a daughter at the age of 29, and divorced her ex-husband at the age of 39. She left the house with nothing and wandered the streets with her daughter. However, it was precisely such a failed old woman who had used only 3 years to personally create a legend in the Federation's gaming industry. In just 3 years, Chengying Entertainment consecutively launched 16 games in different fields and different positions. Its concept, and model were all excellent, and it truly swept the game market. Many people jokingly called Fu Cheng a genius game merchant who was held back by housework. There were even players who wrote letters to her ex-husband, thanking him for letting Fu Cheng go, which led to the birth of so many good games. However, even such a woman who had walked from the bottom to the top, Fu Cheng also had her own troubles. She was too old. In the past, Fu Cheng had worked hard without caring about her health. This year, she had just turned 42 years old, but she looked like an old woman in her 50s. In this era where force cultivation was popular in the world, the study of the human body had already been quite profound. Fu Cheng knew that if she continued like this, she would not have many years left to live. Therefore, she began to cultivate force again, looking for various ways to train her physique, and taking various kinds of health supplements. In any case, she had to persevere until her daughter reached adulthood and hand over the empire that she had built with her own hands to her. However, on this day, Fu Cheng ushered in a brand new opportunity. Do you want to live forever? Do you want to obtain unrivaled power? If someone had written to her, Fu Cheng would definitely not believe this kind of prank. However, when the words were written automatically in front of her, this strange scene forced her to believe it. Who are you? Fu Cheng picked up the notebook that had fallen to the ground. The handwriting on it was clear, and it did not seem fake at all. Who I am is not important. Words began to appear on the notebook again. Complete my mission, and you can get everything you want. Fu Cheng looked at the lighter beside her. She really wanted to burn the notebook to see if someone was playing a prank. But what if it was true? The discovery of force made the class division in the Federation serious once again. For an ordinary person like Fu Cheng who had no power, money was not omnipotent. As if sensing Fu Cheng's silence, the handwriting began to write again. You seem to have encountered some difficulties. Stand in the shadow, and you will receive the gift of the shadow. Fu Cheng looked at the handwriting a few times suspiciously, but finally chose to do as she was told. She turned on the central light and stood behind a pillar. Then, she saw an incredible scene. The shadow under her feet began to boil and gradually covered her whole body. Finally, it gathered on her face and poured into her body from her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, all the way to her heart. The next moment, Fu Cheng felt her heart beating rapidly. Waves of cold power were produced from it and flowed to her limbs and bones. After an unknown amount of time, Fu Cheng felt her consciousness slowly return, and her body was already drenched in cold sweat. She quickly ran in front of the mirror and was stunned on the spot. What she saw was a familiar yet strange face. It was her face when she was 30 years old. Within a year, you will age back to your original appearance. The words on the notebook continued to appear. However, this time, Fu Cheng no longer had any doubts. I want to get more, no matter what it takes. This was indeed a smart woman. In the face of power, she did not care about the meaningless truth. She only cared about what she could get. Go find this person, he will tell you what you need to do. After this line of words appeared on the notebook, a contact address appeared. Director Fu, I don't quite understand what you mean. Professor Wang looked at Fu Cheng in front of him and revealed an inexplicable expression. Of course, he knew Fu Cheng. She was the most legendary woman in the game industry, but the other party's intentions were too strange. You're saying that someone asked you to find me and ask you to do something for him? What kind of person is the other party? Fu Cheng frowned slightly. It's a very mysterious person. Of course, this description could not make Professor Wang understand, but a light suddenly flashed across his mind. Is it this person? Professor Wang operated on his personal computer and displayed a surveillance photo in front of Fu Cheng. Fu Cheng naturally could not recognize Zhao Ping's face. She could only shake her head and say, "I have never seen his face. But, where is this person now?" Chapter 493. Read. Zhao Ping was dead. Professor Wang had heard of Zhao Ping's name from an I Ching. Naturally, he was interested in finding this person's whereabouts. In the end, someone found Zhao Ping's body at a street corner near the academy. There were no wounds on his body, and even his physiological functions were not destroyed. To be precise, his consciousness suddenly disappeared, and then he was starved to death. This strange phenomenon was puzzling. Even the federal police couldn't find out the cause of all this. This was because when Ji Yunan's will descended, Zhao Ping had already been completely obliterated, leaving only his body to be occupied by him. When Ji Yunan's consciousness left, what was left was naturally only an empty shell. Fu Cheng carefully inquired about Zhao Ping's death. She didn't know why, but she felt that this strange cause of death was related to her notebook. "So, did he say anything to you?" Fu Cheng looked at Professor Wang and asked. "He wanted to remake a game." Professor Wang didn't intend to hide anything and told her everything Ji Yunan had said before. "Evil God." Fu Cheng rubbed her chin in thought. After all, she had only been in the industry for 3 years. She didn't have a deep understanding of this old game from hundreds of years ago. Fortunately, Professor Wang was prepared. He passed the information he had given to Ji Yunan to Fu Cheng to read. Boss Fu, Mr. Ji Yunan proposed to use the experience of the God of Light as the main storyline and change the perspective of the game's plot. I think it's quite feasible. After Fu Cheng finished reading, Professor Wang couldn't help but say. If he had only treated it as a normal business at first, then now he sincerely wanted to make this game. Especially when Fu Cheng appeared in front of him, it made Professor Wang realize that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. No matter how much old Wang raised his status, he was only a professor at a second-rate academy, while Fu Cheng was a rising star in the game industry. If he could cooperate with her to make a game, it would undoubtedly help his reputation a lot. Professor Wang didn't expect that Fu Cheng had already said decisively without him saying anything. Then I'll have to trouble Professor Wang to organize the relevant information and make a proposal for me. Our Chengying Entertainment is willing to put down all our work and devote ourselves to it. While Fu Cheng was busy making games, Ji Yunan had already arrived at another place. In the core of the world of heavens, within the inner world, Zero's azure figure was still standing in the air. Her respectful voice reverberated within. "Welcome back, King." Ji Yunan looked at Zero and said, "Do you remember who you used to be?" "What do you mean?" "Before coming here." Zero's voice fell silent. After a long time, a negative answer came through. "No. I can't remember anything." Ji Yunan nodded. He did not expect Zero to remember anything. He just wanted to give it a try. At this moment, a figure gradually appeared behind Ji Yunan. It was an ordinary face, but it exuded a mysterious aura. "It looks like you've seen Yellow Springs." Ju Po walked out from behind Ji Yunan. His eyes fell on Zero. "How is he now?" "You're still stuck at the Dao integration stage?" It seemed that Ju Po had not seen Daoist Yellow Springs for a long time. He did not even know that he had reached the Dao integration stage. Ji Yunan did not say anything about Daoist Yellow Springs. Ju Po did not care either. He just smiled and said, "He said he was going to find the place where we came from." "I don't believe it." "Why not?" Ji Yunan could not help but look at him. Ju Po said, "I watched the 3 realms collapse. At that time, there was no such thing as the heavens and realms. If there really was such a place, it could not be hidden from my eyes." Speaking of this, he sighed again. "What's more, even if we find it, so what? With our current status, we can't go back a long time ago." Ju Po did not know about the existence of the world gap, nor did he know that the bit wall there was particularly strong. He said that he couldn't go back, but it was completely his own thoughts. After all, for a Dao integration stage cultivator, whether it was his hometown or his old friends, they had all been submerged in the long river of time. Only they could exist forever. Ji Yunan, who had seen the blue planet with his own eyes, actually had a similar feeling. Even if it was just a few hundred years, it was enough to completely erase the traces of his previous life. Only when he saw the blue planet with his own eyes did Ji Nan realize that he was now a Tao integration stage cultivator standing at the top of the heavens and realms. Under his feet were all things in the world, all living beings, and the rules of the world were at his mercy. He could do whatever he wanted with the heavens and realms. There was no reason for such an existence to consider himself a mortal. The two of them were no longer in the same dimension. Ji Nan withdrew his consciousness from his contemplation. No matter what his thoughts were, it did not affect what he was going to do next. He was going to make arrangements in the world gap to find the cause of his relationship with Jupo and the others. He was going to continue the blasphemer plan to earn enough sin points for himself. In addition, he was going to sort out the information he had plundered from the Temple of Scholars. The appearance of the God of Dusk was so abrupt that Ji Nan could tell at a glance that something was wrong, and there must be more changes in the details. Now that he had found the world gap, Ji Nan could completely compare the original plot with the real world to find the differences. "Are you interested in cooperating?" Seeing that Ji Nan had fallen silent, Jupo couldn't help but speak again. "It's about hunting the Lord Gods." Ji Nan couldn't help but laugh. "The Lord Gods are not so easy to kill. And why are you so keen on this?" Whether the Lord Gods were easy to kill or not, Ji Nan undoubtedly had the right to speak. In the game, he had almost slaughtered all the Lord Gods, but this did not mean that it was easy to kill the Lord Gods. The best way to deal with the Lord Gods was to destroy their divine kingdoms bit by bit. When they lost all their faith, it would be easier to separate them from the rules. Therefore, the Lord Gods were easier to kill as they progressed. If there was only one Lord God in the world, then Ji Nan could kill him directly. On the contrary, there were more than a dozen Lord Gods who relied on each other, which was the essential reason why it was difficult for him to kill them. Jupo shook his head. "You don't have to worry about my purpose. I know that you rely on killing gods to grow. You just need to tell me if you are willing to cooperate." Ji Nan's gaze fell on Jupo's face, as if he wanted to see through him. This guy was mysterious, but as he said, the other party's purpose had nothing to do with Ji Nan. If there was a chance to kill a Lord God in front of him, Ji Nan would never refuse, because a Lord God meant a lot of sin. For other Tao convergence practitioners, one's rank was not too important, but it was very important to Ji Nan. "Sure." Ji Nan finally nodded. "But not now. I need time." Chapter 494. Reading. To Ji Nan, levels were indeed very important. There was no essential difference between level 11 and level 12 laws. Even the difference between level 11 and level 15 laws was not so great that they could crush each other. However, Ji Nan's true difference was the body of the god of evil. An incredibly powerful body had always been Ji Nan's asset, even after advancing to the second job transition. With the diabolic body, he was confident that he could fight against and even kill a lord. This was also the tactic that Ji Nan was best at. Jupo's true intentions were unknown, so Ji Nan could not completely trust him when he said to cooperate. He needed to gain more power first. For example, advancing to level 12. Even in the game, after Ji Nan's second job transition, he had always been holding back until level 12 before thinking of a way to deal with a Lord God's space. Vivian could not remember when she had come here. Was it 40 years ago? Or was it 50 years ago? It did not seem very important. From the moment she had wanted to escape, to the moment she realized that there was no possibility of escaping, Vivian had already accepted her fate. She had grown from a small mercenary who knew nothing and would even cause the death of her teammates to a peak legendary expert. God's space was now as familiar as her back garden. Vivian's activity area had even become God's square to a large extent. As a veteran reincarnator who had been reincarnating for decades, Vivian was already one of the most powerful members in the entire God space. So the newcomers who entered the God space would be chosen by them first and added to their team. Vivian's teammates had already changed several times, and she was the only one who had survived until now. For example, Nancy had died at the critical juncture of advancing to legendary. Because she could not break through, she was dragged to death by a difficult mission. A new mission has begun. Please prepare to depart immediately. On this day, Vivian received a mission without any warning. This phenomenon was very strange because a reincarnator of her level would usually have time to prepare before a mission began. The next line of words that appeared made Vivian's heart turn cold. Mission type: personal mission. Personal mission. Personal missions in God's space were very rare. The most common situation was a mission that forced advancement. To put it simply, it was either complete the advancement and successfully complete the mission, or die. Vivian would never forget that Nancy had been stuck at the threshold of the legendary realm for too long. In the end, she had accepted a personal promotion mission and died after failing. As for Vivian, she had been promoted outside of a mission and had never received such a mission. She did not expect to see one today. Speaking of which, he seemed to have stayed at the peak of legendary for too long. But what would it be like if he continued to go up? A real god. Vivian's mind was full of thoughts, but her consciousness was gradually pulled out of God's space. Observer 29 has entered the final verification phase. In the white laboratory, the moment Vivian accepted the mission, such a voice rang out. Very well, withdraw all personnel from Space 29. No matter what the result is, it's impossible for her to go back. A man in uniform took off his glasses and said with a sigh. Due to the difference in the laws of time, they had allowed Vivian to live for 40 years in just a few short months. Now, it was finally time to reap the rewards. There was no need for all the people involved in the construction of Space 29 to continue acting. When Vivian woke up again, she found herself in a familiar place. More than 40 years of life and death fighting in God's space did not make Vivian forget her origin. On the contrary, she often thought of old things. If she had had the power she had today back then, would everything have changed? Now her dream had come true. Yes, she was back. Brother. Vivian looked at the familiar face in front of her and could not help but blurt out. Vivian, you're awake? Arthur saw that his sister had woken up and could not help but be happy. Great. No, now is not the time to be happy. He quickly dragged his sister up and carried her on his back. Quick. Let's go. Chase them. Kill them all. The shouts behind them were getting closer and closer. Arthur gritted his teeth and sped up again. He was still comforting his sister. Don't be afraid, Vivian. The Temple of Light is in front. As long as we run into the temple, the great goddess of light will protect us. Vivian was in a trance. Only she knew that if they really ran into the temple, it would be like walking into a trap and trapping themselves in it. These pursuers didn't care about the gods at all. Even the gods that the siblings believed in didn't care about their lives. No. We can't go there. Vivian jumped down from her brother's back and said quickly. Arthur looked at his sister in shock. He did not know how she had suddenly become so lively. However, just as the two of them paused, a sharp arrow shot from behind, aiming straight at Arthur's back. Be careful. Vivian shouted as she subconsciously pointed with her finger. She was used to her identity as a legendary master, and subconsciously wanted to use the power of laws to stop this arrow. It was only when she raised her hand that she realized that she had returned to the past, and she was no longer the power of laws had appeared. Under Vivian's surprised gaze, she directly deflected the arrow. The terrifying power of laws even overflowed and directly killed more than half of the pursuers. Legendary Master, let's go. The leader of the pursuers finally had some foresight. After seeing this scene, he immediately ordered. Vivian looked at her hands in shock. Arthur was even more dumbfounded. He looked at his sister as if he did not know her. Vivian did not have time to think. No matter where her power came from, the most important thing now was to take her brother away. However, at this moment, a ray of light began to shine down from the sky. Arthur was too familiar with this aura. He immediately prostrated himself and said with tears streaming down his face, Praise the Lord. You really did not give up on us. Vivian was also familiar with the aura of the Goddess of Light, but she knew in her heart that it was not the gods who had saved her brother, but her power. Fallen. The voice of the Goddess of Light was extremely cold. Those who obtain the power of the devil will be punished by me. Arthur felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He turned around in disbelief and looked at his sister. Could it be that her previous power came from the devil? Chapter 495. Reading. Vivian and her brother Arthur were believers of the goddess of light, and they were educated to believe in God as everything. Arthur was like that at the moment. On one side was God, and on the other was his sister who had lived with him since childhood, but he still chose to believe in God. He felt that his sister must have been tempted by the devil. Otherwise, how could she have fallen? Vivian, wake up. No, I'm awake, brother. Vivian spoke indifferently, without any emotion on her face. If I have the power of the devil, I'd rather fall. If that's the case, then go and join the devil. The goddess of light's voice sounded coldly. In the next moment, boundless light descended and enveloped Vivian. Vivian activated all the power of the rules. Her heart was filled with hatred like never before. She hated God from the bottom of her heart, especially the goddess of light in front of her. Vivian, who had once held power, could not go back to the past, to the girl who prayed devoutly. More importantly, she could not bear the fact that God did not protect them, but was angry because she had mastered power other than God. But Vivian's understanding of God in the past was at least correct about one thing, and that was that God was not someone mortals could compete with. Even if the goddess of light was only a sixth-order god, she was not someone the fourth-order Vivian could compete with. The moment the divine power of light fell, all of Vivian's rules were destroyed, and even her body was quickly destroyed. In the blink of an eye, only a trace of consciousness was left. Is this the power of God? In Vivian's vision, she seemed to see herself vanishing into thin air, and her brother staring at the place where she disappeared, the figure crying loudly. Vivian suddenly felt sad, because 40 years ago, she had experienced this herself. Power. I want power, enough power to compete with God. Her mind gradually became clear, and she remembered that she should be in the middle of a mission in God's space. No matter whether the brother in front of her was real or fake, she still had one last chance. Give me power. If you are a devil, please take everything from me. Vivian's screams reverberated through the air, and then she felt her vision blur. Everything around her disappeared, and the world was filled with boundless white. In the space that was as white as paper, Vivian opened her eyes wide and looked around curiously, only to see a small altar in front of her. There was nothing else on the altar, only a crystal-clear fragment floating in the air. Vivian did not know what it was, but there was a voice in her heart that kept telling her to pick up the fragment, and she would get everything she wanted. The 29th has entered the final step of the verification. In the laboratory, the man in the uniform stared at Vivian, waiting for the final result. At the same time, he said to Red Tail beside him. Vivian was the target that Red Tail had personally brought back. She had instructed her a long time ago to inform her of Vivian's final fusion process. We used the power of illusions to stimulate Vivian's emotions to the extreme in order to strengthen her will to live and increase the success rate of fusing with the nightmare divine spark, the man in uniform said. Such a Lord-level divine spark was not something that mortals were qualified to get their hands on, even if it was only a small part. The previous 28 test subjects all exploded and died when the divine spark entered their bodies because they could not withstand the terrifying boost brought by the divine spark. We can only rely on the individual will of the test subjects to withstand it. Red Tail frowned slightly. If this was the only way to deal with it, it would be equivalent to saying that the experiment itself had no progress, and the previous test subjects' deaths were worthless. Hearing the dissatisfaction in Red Tail's words, the man in uniform wiped his sweat and said, "We have detected that as the experiments continue, the laws within the divine spark are becoming milder. Then why not find a group of mortals to die?" Red Tail said coldly. They had spent a lot of effort to nurture every test subject, so how could they waste them like this? The man in uniform broke out in cold sweat. "Sir, you may not know this, but ordinary mortals who have not been nurtured by the Lord-level space have almost no hope of success. Instead, they will waste the power of the divine spark for nothing." After a pause, the man immediately said, "Please rest assured, sir. As long as one test subject succeeds and breaks the stable structure of the divine spark itself, the subsequent fusion will be much easier." Red Tail was silent for a while, tacitly agreeing with the man's approach, and his gaze returned to Vivian. Vivian was attempting to fuse the divine spark. She, who was already at her wit's end, did not hesitate and chose to hand everything over to the fragment in front of her. The divine spark easily entered her body and fused with her divine soul. The laws of nightmare had been completely cleansed, leaving only the purest divine power to invade and occupy Vivian completely. Vivian felt as if her body was about to explode, and the terrifying power tore her divine soul apart again and again, but it recovered in an extremely short period of time. The endless pain was almost enough to make one collapse, and countless laws began to appear in front of Vivian. She had never seen laws so clear and easy to understand. Almost at the instant she saw these laws, she had already stepped into rank 5, and then quickly moved towards rank 6. With the support of the Lord-level divine spark, Vivian did not even need a divine kingdom, nor did she need the power of faith to raise herself to a whole new level. This was the absolute suppression that a Lord-level divine spark had over ordinary gods. If a god obtained a Lord-level divine spark, they could even continuously advance in a short period of time. After an unknown period of time, Vivian opened her eyes again, and the nightmare divine spark was still quietly floating in front of her. "It's a success. My lord, it's a success." The laboratory was in a state of jubilation. As the person in charge of Project Blasphemer, the man in uniform was undoubtedly the most excited, especially since Red Tail was personally present this time. Red Tail was also very happy, but she did not let the joy get to her head. She quickly said, "Quick, send the news back to the Divine Kingdom. Vivian is at least rank 6 now, none of us can stop her." The news spread very quickly, and in a mere moment, they saw Vivian's body go limp in the image, collapsing into the white space, and a figure appeared behind Red Tail. "Between rank 6 and rank 7, not bad," Ji Yunan said with a faint smile. "My lord." "Greetings, my lord." Red Tail was the first to bow, and the men in uniform and the other laboratory personnel were all extremely excited. This was the legendary one. Ji Yunan waved his hand. "Send Vivian to the Pantheon world. Project Blasphemer officially begins. The Nightmare Divine Spark structure has been disintegrated. Go prepare the next test subject." Chapter 496. Read. With the level of a Lord God's divinity, it was certainly impossible to leave the divinity in a person's body for a long time like Lan Sai did back then. Even if it was only a short period of fusion, it was enough for the fusion subject to benefit greatly and improve to an unimaginable level. After checking Vivian's condition, Ji Yunan immediately let her try blasphemy. In fact, as the first person to succeed in the fusion, her degree of fusion was not very high, and her strength had just entered the 6th level. It was not easy to kill the radiant goddess, who was also at the 6th level. But this was no longer important, because her greatest value was to break the structure of the divinity. After that, the fusion probability of all experimental subjects would be greatly increased, and Ji Yunan would be produced by enough blasphemers. Speaking of which, this situation was much better than in the game. In the past, there was no Lord God's divinity as a material for him to cultivate blasphemers. If he had used the divinity of a 10th level god as a blueprint, it would not have been so smooth. In the following days, Ji Yunan waited peacefully in his god kingdom, waiting for the results of the blasphemer plan. At the same time, he pushed forward with another work. This work was to compare the information of the Temple of Scholars and analyze which historical events might have been caused by the intervention of the heavenly worlds. Since he had been to the world of the crack and checked the game information that had been saved, with Ji Yunan's current memory, he naturally would not miss anything. Ji Yunan did not ask anyone to do the analysis and comparison work. He completed every step himself. Netherworld Taoist said that he saw 9 spirits, but Ji Yunan knew very well that he did not find the other party's incarnation as the god of dusk in the game. Instead, it was the NPC related to Zero that appeared normally. Or rather, the reason why Ji Yunan had noticed him in the first place was because the real history did not match up with his memories. If people who came out of the world of the crack could see a part of history, then how could these differences be explained? After comparing the information of the two parties, Ji Yunan's work was able to proceed smoothly. It was only by observing the entire history of the Pantheon world that Ji Yunan was able to make new discoveries. There were many gods like the god of dusk, but most of them didn't have a clear title, and their appearances were short-lived. This group of people was mainly concentrated after the Third Divine War, and had been like this until now. Obviously, they were the Star Lords from the heavenly worlds. However, just like the god of dusk back then, due to the difference in their levels, they did not have much of an impact on the general trend of history. Especially after the Fourth Divine War, the entire Pantheon world was reshuffled and the Star Lords left on a large scale, causing the Pantheon world to revert back to the way Ji Nan remembered it to be. None of the people from the heavenly realms appear in the game. Ji Nan couldn't help standing up after coming to this conclusion. This kind of strong law that completely separated the two worlds and was not connected to each other was obviously not a coincidence. I'm afraid there are other secrets in the crack world. Daoist Huang Quan has been staying in the crevice for tens of thousands of years. It's impossible that he just wants peace. Ji Nan had a plan in mind. He had communicated with Ju Po, and knew that when Daoist Huang Quan left, he claimed that he was looking for his hometown. However, in the end, he still needed more power. If Ji Nan was already at the 15th rank, or even the 3rd rank, he could completely conquer the two worlds, gather all the power to open up the crevice, and explore the secrets within. Just as Ji Nan was thinking about the follow-up, Yang Xiaoxiao suddenly appeared in front of him. "Teacher, something happened." Yang Xiaoxiao's expression was a little serious, which was rare for her. "And Tianxing is dead, and Lan Sai and Xie Yun have been seriously injured." Ji Nan slowly turned his head, his face expressionless. "Who did it?" "Cloudy Dream Heaven." "But the root of this matter is still related to what happened in the Magnificent Heaven," Yang Xiaoxiao explained as briefly as possible. The whole thing was not complicated. Ji Nan closed the God Kingdom to the outside world, but the people in the God Kingdom would still go out for trade and daily tasks. In particular, some of the players, like Tianxing and Xie Yun, spent most of their time outside the God Kingdom. This was a relatively important trade activity, and they needed to transport a batch of top-grade resources. Thus, Red Tail invited Lan Sai, and Tianxing, and Xie Yun to oversee it. Who would have thought that even with such a lineup, they would still be attacked, and the attacker was from the Cloudy Dream Heaven. The Cloudy Dream Heaven is related to the Magnificent Heaven? Ji Nan raised his eyebrows. The Magnificent Heaven's previous astral lord was good friends with Meng Xian. It was during the battle when Meng Xian was asleep that she sustained an irrecoverable injury. Yang Xiaoxiao had clearly investigated the matter, and had sorted out the ins and outs of the entire matter. "Finally," she said, "also, we found out that the Heavenly Deity Society might be behind this." However, Ji Nan stood up and interrupted her. "That's not important." "Cloudy Dream Heaven." Hu Kuei stood in front of Meng Xian. After hearing about the conflict between the two sides, he immediately rushed to the Cloudy Dream Heaven. "This matter isn't simple," Hu Kuei said. "The Great Sage isn't someone who likes to rely on others. He didn't ask you for help earlier, so why would he suddenly do this now?" Meng Xian smiled faintly. "I know. However, I watched the Great Sage grow up. Since things have already come to this, there's no reason for me to stay out of it." Hu Kuei was still trying to persuade her. Ji Nan slaughtered the Magnificent Heaven before he fused with the Tao. "Now, no one said this was revenge," Meng Xian laughed coldly. "It's just an ordinary conflict. If Ji Nan isn't happy, he can come and talk to me himself." Hu Kuei couldn't help but sigh deeply. He knew that his old friend was determined to make things difficult for Ji Nan. However, she had clearly witnessed Ji Nan's power back then. At that time, she didn't pursue the matter of her own son, but now she was acting for an outsider. Hu Kuei looked at Meng Xian's calm face again, and finally nodded lightly. Seeing that he finally understood her intentions, Meng Xian couldn't help but smile. However, just as she was about to speak, her expression suddenly changed. Ji Nan went directly to the Magnificent Heaven. A cold glint flashed through Meng Xian's eyes. Is he planning to act against the Great Sage just like that? He was a mighty Tao integration stage mighty figure, yet he was attacking without any evidence. That was far too shameless. "You'd better make a trip to the Magnificent Heaven immediately." Having personally witnessed Ji Nan's rise, Hu Kuei, who knew his style of doing things, couldn't help but say, he's indeed capable of doing such a thing. Elsewhere, in the magnificent heaven that had just been rebuilt, an enormous shadow sword that stretched for hundreds of kilometers fell like a meteor, heavily striking the palace that the great sage immortal had just rebuilt. Chapter 497. Read. Ji Nan. Accompanied by the grand sage immortal empress's scream, all of the ultimate emperor's power boiled, condensing into a single point and surging towards Ji Nan. After destroying and rebuilding the ultimate emperor, the total amount could not compare to before, but the grand sage immortal empress could control it 100%. Under these circumstances, the power that the grand sage immortal empress could instantly erupt with was even stronger than before. Unfortunately, Ji Nan was no longer the same as before. He did not even need to use the heretic god's body. Just by relying on the law of shadows, he could easily destroy his opponent. Ji Nan casually pointed to the ground, and the several 100-meter-long shadow sword was instantly ignited. Shadow flames engulfed the entire imperial palace. As for the power of the star realm that the grand sage immortal empress had activated, it was unable to withstand a single blow from the shadow flames. In the blink of an eye, it was completely incinerated, and even became nourishment for the shadow. He had learned this move from Austin. Light and shadow were indeed interlinked. Although holy light was extremely tyrannical, shadow could also display similar characteristics. In fact, its assimilation ability was even stronger than holy light's. As a result, under the grand sage immortal empress's gaze, the ultimate emperor that she had painstakingly rebuilt was mostly destroyed by a huge fire. This was something that could not be helped. For a star realm with a celestial empire system, the resources would definitely be gathered at the beginning, and the priority would be to create a political and economic center. As a result, it was completely burned down by Ji Nan. Ji Nan, what grudge do I have with you? You want it twice. Dream Immortal touched my people, so you have to pay this debt. Ji Nan stood in the air, looking down coldly. His expression did not even change as he spoke casually. This time, the Grand Sage Immortal Empress really wanted to vomit blood. The Grand Sage Immortal Empress had heard about how a Star Lord of Yunmeng had laid his hands on Ji Nan's subordinates because of her, but she did not think much of it. This was because she had a clear conscience. This entire matter had nothing to do with her. Could it be that others could forcefully pin the blame on her? Moreover, Ji Nan was already a Dao integration cultivator. Even if he was dissatisfied with this matter, he should have gone straight to El March. How could he come to her side? Even Song Fei, who was famous for shielding his own people, had never done such an unreasonable thing. However, Ji Nan had used his actions to prove that one could really do whatever one wanted with strength. Ji Nan stood in the middle of the sea of fire, waiting for the Dream Immortal to arrive. He had never thought about negotiating. All he knew was to force the other party out and beat them into submission. However, to his surprise, the first to appear was not Meng Xian, but Elder Zi Luo. After Zi Luo appeared, he first extinguished the shadow flames that Ji Nan had casually released. Only then did he stand in front of the Grand Sage Immortal Empress to protect her. He sighed, Ji Nan, you two belong to the same deity society after all. Why don't you just let it go this time? With that, the Grand Sage Immortal Empress could not help but look at him in astonishment. Everyone knew that Ji Nan would never give up. Did old man Zi Luo mean that he wanted to force him out of the God's Assembly? The Grand Sage Immortal Empress was also someone who had played with schemes for many years. She immediately understood Elder Zi Luo's true intentions and even thought of more. However, no matter what, Ji Nan leaving the God's Assembly was something she was happy to see. At least from now on, if Ji Nan dared to attack her again, the God's Assembly could support her. However, the two did not expect that Ji Nan's reaction was not what they had expected. All right, this time it has nothing to do with her. Ji Nan nodded. In any case, what needed to be burned had already been burned. Naturally, the Grand Sage Immortal Empress had nothing to do with it. Elder Zi Luo also heard his unspoken words. His face darkened. There cannot be a next time. If you attack a fellow member of the organization for no reason again, this old man can only ask you to leave the God's Assembly. This old man had already realized that he could not beat around the bush in front of Ji Yunan. Otherwise, he would be led into a ditch. Fine. As expected, Ji Yunan was satisfied this time. The gods' assembly no longer had any value to him. Of course he did not care about this. Elder Zi Luo fell silent. He seemed to be considering this matter, but he did not immediately reply. It was also at this moment that Dream Immortal's figure suddenly descended. She walked over step by step on a pink lotus flower. In the blink of an eye, she had covered the entire distance. Thus, a long path of lotus flowers appeared in the air, making one feel as if they were in a dream. Ji Yunan. Dream Immortal's gaze fell on Ji Yunan. Her voice seemed to come from far away, dreamy and illusory. I advise you not to act blindly without thinking. Look carefully at who has come this time. Her footsteps lightly shifted, revealing a few figures behind her. Shi Dao Song Fei, 3 Buddhas Fa Kong, and army destroyer Hua Kuei. Hua Kuei was Dream Immortal's close friend. After understanding that this was an encirclement against Ji Yunan, he did not reject Dream Immortal's invitation and participated in this matter. Song Fei did not need to say much. He was Ji Yunan's old friend. However, he had already given up on revenge. Now that he had appeared here, there was clearly another reason. Therefore, the root of all the problems fell on the last person. 3 Buddhas Fa Kong. Among the original 13 Buddhas, the 3 Buddhas were the only plane that was established as a Buddhist sect. In a sense, the 3 Buddhas were the true holy land of Buddhism. It was the place that all Buddhist disciples yearned to go. In terms of history and origin, the 3 Buddhas were actually very old. However, this astral realm had also experienced a few ups and downs. Now, everything was the same, but the people were different. The astral realm was named 3 Buddhas because there were 3 Buddhas in the astral realm when it was established. After several changes of owners, the current owner was this big monk in front of them. Monk Fa Kong. Amitabha. Monk Fa Kong was smiling as if he was practicing the Maitreya Zen, even though the living beings under his feet had just been slaughtered. Almsgiver Ji Yu has killed too many people. Why don't you put down the butcher's knife and follow this poor monk to live in the Buddhist kingdom? You will be free. Although his words were roundabout, the meaning was clear. He wanted to gather everyone's strength to capture Ji Yunan and seal him within the 3 Buddhas. The 3 Buddhas were such an extremely strange astral realm. Its strength was influenced by its believers, and on the other hand, it was determined by the evil demons sealed within. The more evil demons sealed within the 3 Buddhas, the more powerful they were, and the stronger the Buddhist power of the 3 Buddhas themselves. This time, Monk Fa Kong obviously had his eyes on the evil demon Ji Yunan. Logically, a guy like Ji Yunan, who killed wantonly, should have been targeted by the 3 Buddhas long ago. However, his strength was relatively low in the early years, and the 3 Buddhas didn't think much of him. When Ji Yunan really became famous, his strength progressed too quickly. Before the 3 Buddhas could react, he was already a figure at the Tao integration level. Chapter 498. Read. What made Fa Kong even more satisfied was that Ji Yunan's previous decisiveness in killing had already made him countless enemies. Even among the Tao integration cultivators, there were some who were willing to attack him. Today's situation had only come about after all the motivations and conditions had matured. Fa Kong, Song Fei, Meng Xian, and Hua Kuei had surrounded Ji Yunan, but they had gone overboard. They hadn't really hoped to kill Ji Yunan. As long as they used Fa Kong's special technique to seal him within the 3 Buddhas, this world would undoubtedly be much more peaceful. As for Elder Zi Luo, he had just arrived at the right time. Even though he had wanted to force Ji Yunan out of the gods' assembly, he had only used this opportunity to secretly give him a hand. He had no intention of completely turning against Ji Yunan. Including Ji Yunan, there were already 6 Tao integration cultivators gathered in the Ultimate Emperor realm. This was an extremely rare scene. Ji Yunan's gaze swept across the 4 of them before finally stopping on Song Fei. The next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared. His fist landed on Song Fei's face. Only then did his voice ring out. First. At Ji Yunan's level of cultivation, It didn't matter whether one's reaction was fast or slow. The pure speed and strength of the heretic god's body practically formed the laws of absolute hit and unbreakable. In the end, it was still the energy of the laws that competed. However, the nomological power of the heretic god's body far surpassed that of ordinary nomological power. Thus, a huge black hole instantly appeared where Song Fei was. Under Ji Yunan's fist, the entire space was instantly pierced through. Song Fei almost spat out a mouthful of blood on Ji Yunan's face. On the surface, Meng Xian was the one who had stirred up trouble, but in secret, Fa Kong was the one who had taken the lead. Song Fei had come to lend a hand. Why was he the first? However, he wasn't in the mood to question anything at this time. He hurriedly waved his ruler and escaped from the black hole that Ji Yunan had created. Song Fei's nomological power was nothing special, but it was powerful and resilient. It wouldn't be destroyed easily, and he could always find a way to turn things around. However, the moment Ji Yunan made a move, it brought him great pressure. This was a monster whose body was so strong that every move was enough to form rules. Ji Yunan was merciless. He took a step forward and appeared behind Song Fei, punching him again. Amitabha. The three people around him naturally couldn't sit back and watch Song Fei be beaten up. Fa Kong chanted a Buddhist name and was the first to attack. Ji Yunan had seen a Buddhist expert before. When he advanced to the 4th rank, Young Lady No Return was the reincarnation of the 10,000 Realms Buddha. Her Buddhist kingdom in the palm had once left an impression on Ji Yunan. Compared to monk Fa Kong, Wancha Buddha was like heaven and earth. As the only Tao integration Buddhist cultivator in the world, Fa Kong had the power to suppress all evil demons. Golden light descended from the sky, bathing most of the ultimate emperor realm in a golden hue. The Dream Immortal and Hua Kuei made their moves at the same time, and Dreamforce inexplicably concentrated on Ji Yunan. Meanwhile, Hua Kuei returned to her golden armor. She wielded a long spear and pointed it at Ji Yunan. At Hua Kuei's level, her spear attack had already become a spear that could ignore all physical defenses and directly hit Ji Yunan's consciousness. Ji Yunan's fist landed on Song Fei's face, but he was facing the attacks of 3 Tao integration cultivators. However, he didn't care. Take it head on. Ever since Ji Yunan had started his cultivation, he had never changed his battle style. Even now, he had reached the Tao integration stage. The tyrannical punch landed, its power comparable to the destruction nomological power. It instantly destroyed Song Fei's body, and Ji Yunan also took the brunt of the attack. The dream force condensed into a tangible form, causing his body to distort and change shape. He was like a monster in a dream. Under the illumination of the Buddhist light, Ji Yunan's monster body quickly melted and disintegrated. On the other hand, Hua Kuei's golden spear was destroying Ji Yunan's willpower, causing his movements to become sluggish. Song Fei reformed his body at the side, his face slightly pale. Ji Yunan's punch had destroyed part of his nomological power, causing him some damage. However, it wasn't fatal. Correspondingly, Ji Yunan's injuries were definitely more severe. However, he never expected that Ji Yunan would completely ignore his crazed appearance. He chased after Song Fei and punched him again. "Are you crazy?" Song Fei no longer cared about his composure. Without hesitation, he swung the ruler at Ji Yunan and roared. Ji Yunan's desperate battle would only result in a lose-lose situation. Moreover, even a Tao integration cultivator would die if he fought like this. The ruler could not stop Ji Yunan's movements at all. He didn't care about his injuries at all. He just wanted to take Song Fei's head. He exploded with a single punch. After his body was destroyed for the second time, Song Fei no longer had any interest in attacking Ji Yunan. He retracted all his nomological power and escaped to his astral realm. Ji Yunan's 2 punches had caused him too much damage. He was only here to help. How could he be willing to throw his life away? Seeing that Song Fei had disappeared, Ji Yunan stood still and twisted his neck. Due to the distorting dream force, when Ji Yunan twisted his neck, more than half of his head was snapped off. However, his regenerative abilities were too strong. He could even recover from such injuries in the blink of an eye. There were only 3 enemies left in front of him. Ji Yunan looked around again and his gaze finally landed on Hua Kuei. The second one. Hua Kuei felt as if she had been targeted by a venomous snake. Her heart skipped a beat. In the next moment, she met Song Fei's fate. She felt a pain at the back of her head. Her golden armor shattered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even her body started to collapse. Hua Kuei was a martial artist after all. Her abilities were above Song Fei's. She struggled and stabbed her spear into Ji Yunan's forehead. Ji Yunan didn't even try to dodge. He allowed the golden spear to pierce through his head. Then, he exploded with a punch. The third one. Amidst the blood mist, Ji Yunan pulled the golden spear out from his face and threw it to the side. Then, he looked at Meng Xian. Meng Xian's mouth twitched. Hua Kuei's body had also been destroyed. She had no intention of appearing again. This was equivalent to asking her to let go. Although Ji Yunan was extremely strong in battle, at least he couldn't chase them to the ends of the earth. What Meng Xian really couldn't accept was that someone could forcefully kill someone while being surrounded by 3 Dao integration cultivators. Fa Kong's Buddhist light suppressed all evil. Under normal circumstances, this person should have been sealed long ago. Amitabha. Fa Kong chanted the name of Buddha and stood in front of Meng Xian. He also understood that at this moment, he had to stand in front of them. This monk, who had been smiling all this while, looked at Ji Yunan and sighed softly. Benefactor, you risked your life to injure 2 of your fellow Taoists. I'm afraid you're also heavily injured now. Why do you have to walk down a path of no return? Why don't you follow me to the Buddhist domain to get rid of the killing in your heart? Chapter 499. Read. Ji Yunan was indeed heavily injured. His body was far stronger than others of the same level. He was so strong that he could destroy Dao fusing cultivators with just his body. But even this Ji Yunan was not a Superman who would never be injured. Directly taking on the attacks of 3 Dao fusing cultivators still caused his body to be greatly damaged. Hua Kuei's spear attack before her body was destroyed had directly destroyed more than half of Ji Yunan's divine soul. If Ji Yunan had been a traditional Dao fusing cultivator, he would not have been able to use the power of laws. Unfortunately, Ji Yunan dared to fight like this because he had an extremely strong recovery ability and the confidence to fight and leave whenever he wanted. The third one. Ji Yunan's cold gaze fell on Dream Immortal's face as he repeated this sentence. Dream Immortal's heart tightened slightly. Song Fei and Hua Kuei's mistakes were right before her eyes. Even with Monk Fa Kong blocking in front of her, she had no choice but to be cautious. The dream force slowed down slightly. It retracted a little from Ji Yunan's hand and enveloped her body. Dream Immortal's figure started to become illusory, placing herself between the dream and reality. This ensured that even if Ji Yunan attacked instantly, he would not be able to destroy her immediately. Indeed, at this moment, Ji Yunan's figure instantly disappeared. Dream Immortal's body instantly became completely illusory. Even if this state consumed a lot of her energy, it was still better than being destroyed by Ji Yunan. Monk Fa Kong suddenly raised his hand, and the Buddha beads on his wrist scattered in all directions, all landing around Dream Immortal. He had actually used his protective Dharma treasure on Dream Immortal, completely disregarding his own safety. Even if Ji Yunan were to change his target and go after him directly. However, Ji Yunan had disappeared. Dream Immortal had used up a lot of her energy to place herself in the dream, and the Buddha beads that Monk Fa Kong had immediately released had all been wasted. Dream Immortal waited for a long time, and after confirming that Ji Yunan's aura had completely disappeared, she could not help but blurt out, "He ran away?" She had originally thought that Ji Yunan was hiding nearby, but when Dream Force and Buddhist light enveloped the area at the same time and failed to find any traces of Ji Yunan, she finally realized what had happened. Fa Kong's expression changed slightly. Not good. As a Dao integration stage cultivator, Ji Yunan had always been able to bully people who had yet to reach the Dao integration stage. He could slaughter even ultimate Emperor Realm cultivators, but could the 3 Buddhas be an exception? Monk Fa Kong realized this possibility and immediately rushed back to the territory of the 3 Buddhas, but to his surprise, Ji Yunan did not appear there. The 3 Buddha statues were peaceful and there were no signs of being invaded by foreign enemies. Just as Fa Kong was about to return, a shrill cry came from within the Ultimate King realm. Dream Immortal had finally been waiting for Ji Yunan's attack. However, she didn't like this kind of attack. In just a short while, Ji Yunan's injuries had already recovered by more than half because he had dodged the attack. Ji Yunan, who had escaped the influence of the Dream Realm, immediately appeared behind Dream Immortal and tore apart the Dream Force protecting her body. However, the Dream Realm's protection was still effective. Dream Immortal wasn't instantly destroyed like Song Fei and Hua Kuei had been. Instead, she used the Dream Realm to attack Ji Yunan, instantly engulfing Ji Yunan's entire body. As he came into contact with the Dream Realm's power, the nomological laws stuck to Ji Yunan's body like a nightmare. Every movement he made caused his body to be torn apart, and he suffered terrifying injuries. At the same time, the heretic god's body rapidly regenerated and recovered, allowing Ji Yunan to maintain a state where he was on the brink of death and had yet to be completely destroyed. Dream Immortal was an almighty who had experienced many battles. She was the same kind of person as Hua Kuei. Even when faced with such a desperate situation, she didn't have any thoughts of running away. Instead, she hardened her heart and poured all of her Dream Realm nomological laws into Ji Yunan. Dream Immortal knew that Ji Yunan's strength lay in his explosive power and unparalleled speed. If she wanted to catch him, she would have to wait for him to attack first. Now was the best opportunity, do it. As Dream Immortal shouted, Ji Yunan felt his spirit waver slightly, and he had completely fallen into the Dream Realm. Endless Buddhist light enveloped him once again. With the amplification from the Dream Realm's power, it was several times stronger than Fa Kong's own power. The Buddhist light shone on Ji Yunan's body, causing his body to rapidly melt away. However, before this happened, his fist had already hit Dream Immortal. This path integration practitioner, who had just been revived, had been instantly destroyed by this punch. In addition to the fact that she had forcefully attacked, the damage she had suffered was far greater than Song Fei and Hua Kuei. People who were ruthless to others would often be even more ruthless to themselves. Dream Immortal was undoubtedly this kind of person. Fa Kong appeared once again, and the astral realm's power poured down like it was free. The power of the 3 Buddhas was mobilized, and all of them pressed down. Although Ji Yunan's body had melted away, everyone knew that he hadn't truly died. A path integration practitioner wouldn't be killed so easily. In the center of the Buddhist light, there was a shadow that was emitting black light. This was the shadow nomological laws that Ji Yunan represented. The shadow was everywhere and couldn't be trapped under normal circumstances. Only a true Buddha Almighty like Monk Fa Kong could create an area with endless Buddhist light and suppress all the nomological laws within it. This was a method of suppressing evil spirits, and he wanted to seal Ji Yunan with it. At that moment, Song Fei and Hua Kuei appeared at the same time. Their ruler and golden spear descended together, wanting to strike the shadow down again. Although they had been beaten up by Ji Yunan to the point that they didn't dare to show themselves, once Ji Yunan was at a disadvantage, they wouldn't mind coming out to beat him up. It had to be said that no one who could reach the path integration realm lacked battle awareness. Ji Yunan had an invincible body, which was his strongest point. However, at the same time, this also meant that as long as this point was broken, Ji Yunan would fall into an extremely weak state. Dream Immortal risked a huge amount of damage to herself and joined forces with Fa Kong to temporarily destroy the body of the evil god. This finally gave the 4 path integration practitioners a chance. Now that Ji Yunan's body had yet to recover, he couldn't fight against the 4 path integration practitioners by relying on nomological laws alone. As long as they could take advantage of this opportunity to seal him, they would succeed. Monk Fa Kong naturally understood this, so he didn't seem to be stingy at all. The Buddhist beads appeared in his hand again, but this time, he shook them lightly and destroyed all of them. The Buddhist beads were crushed into powder, which shrouded the shadow below. The entire Extreme Emperor realm shone with golden light. Ji Yunan is in trouble this time. In a corner of the Extreme Emperor realm, Elder Zi Luo shook his head and sighed. The Grand Sage Celestial Empress was by his side. Chapter 500. Reading. Fusing with the Tao was the ultimate goal of any Star Lord who wished to fuse with the Tao. What the ultimate goal meant was that once they reached it, they would at least be able to take a breather. Ji Yunan's current predicament was undoubtedly a huge blow to the Grand Sage Immortal Empress. In front of these Tao fusing experts, she was considered a junior, and this was the first time she had seen a battle to the death between Tao fusing experts. She couldn't help but ask, will Ji Yunan die just like this? No, Tao fusing experts aren't that easy to kill. Elder Zi Luo shook his head. However, he has killed too many people. Being suppressed by Fa Kong is unavoidable. The Grand Sage Immortal Empress fell silent. The word suppressed meant that one could be suppressed for a while, or for tens of thousands of years. When he saw Fa Kong destroy the prayer beads, Elder Zi Luo understood that Ji Yunan would not be able to escape this calamity. This was one of the treasures that the three Buddha realms had accumulated over tens of thousands of years. It was a magic treasure forged from the relics of 6 Supreme Star Lords after they had passed away. Fa Kong had invested so much in order to seal Ji Yunan in the shortest amount of time possible. From this, one could see how much pressure Ji Yunan was giving him. Ji Yunan can be proud of himself for being able to fight against 4 Tao fusing experts right after advancing to the Tao fusing, Elder Zi Luo said regretfully. Elder Zi Luo said with slight regret. And the price of sealing him is so great that I'm afraid none of them could have imagined it. The golden light within the ultimate Emperor realm was already gradually receding, surging towards the center. The shadow had already reached a point where it could not move, completely locked down by the prayer beads. Just as Elder Zi Luo had said, whether it was Meng Xian or Song Fei, or even the organizer, Fa Kong, none of them had imagined that this battle would be so bitter. The one who had suffered the most in this battle was Hua Kuei, who had only been a bystander. She had only been destroyed once, but she had still managed to deal some damage before dying, so she had not suffered too much. Song Fei had been completely used as a punching bag. He had taken 2 of Ji Yunan's punches, but he had only managed to buy some time. Not only had he suffered great losses, but he had also lost all face. When the results of this battle spread, Song Fei would undoubtedly be viewed as the weakest among the 5 participants in the Tao integration stage. Meng Xian and Fa Kong, on the other hand, were the 2 who had suffered the greatest losses. One's vitality had been greatly damaged, and it was unknown how many years it would take for her to recover, while the other's personal treasure had been destroyed, directly damaging the foundation of the Star Realm. Monk Farkong still had a compassionate expression on his face, but whether or not his heart was bleeding was not something that outsiders could know. When the golden light completely gathered and sealed the shadow within, Monk Fa Kong chanted Buddha's name, Amitabha. The evil spirit has been sealed. On behalf of the common people, this poor monk thanks the 3 benefactors for their righteousness. Meng Xian was naturally not interested in listening to this sort of nonsense. She coldly harumphed and turned around, returning to her own star realm to recuperate. Hua Kuei didn't have much of a relationship with Fa Kong. This time, she was purely here to help Dream Immortal, so she naturally bade farewell and left. Song Fei chatted with Monk Fa Kong for a while. No matter what, they were considered comrades after this battle. Sometimes, the friendship between Tao integration cultivators was built up bit by bit. The news that the 6 Tao integration cultivators of the ultimate monarch realm had appeared, and that Ji Yunan had been surrounded and attacked by 4 Tao integration cultivators was like a deep water bomb that exploded in all the realms after the battle had ended. It had been many years since a battle of this level had taken place in all the realms, and the results of the battle had been so shocking. It had actually ended with Ji Yunan being sealed and the 4 Tao integration cultivators all being injured. Some people firmly believed that Tao integration cultivators wouldn't die just like that. They believed that Ji Yunan would definitely make a comeback, and that his star realm was undamaged was proof of that. There were also people who believed that although Ji Yunan's star realm would not be affected, he would inevitably have to live in the 3 Buddhas for tens of thousands of years, becoming the highest level evil spirit sealed within the 3 Buddhas. At the same time, all kinds of rumors were spreading everywhere. For example, Ji Yunan was too powerful. He had just ascended, but he was already able to fight against 4 Tao integration cultivators, which led to him being surrounded and attacked. the original 13 joined forces to suppress a new Tao integration cultivator, and so on. All kinds of conspiracy theories couldn't be stopped. However, regarding this battle, the 16 Buddhas were all silent. Not a single one of them publicly expressed their opinions. This strange silence further fueled the speculations of the people from all the realms. Time records. Ji Nan isn't that easy to deal with. Lu Wen seemed to be very confident in Ji Nan. If Fa Kong is smart, he might as well hand Ji Nan over to the gods. Otherwise, he'll regret it sooner or later. Even you think so? But if Fa Kong had that kind of determination, he wouldn't have dared to attack Ji Nan, a person said casually as he calmly held onto a cup of tea in front of Lu Wen. This person was none other than Ju Po, who had previously invited Ji Nan to join forces with him. Ju Po was a mysterious person. There were very few people who knew his appearance, and even fewer people knew that he was actually related to Lu Wen. Moreover, their relationship seemed to be pretty good. That's true, Lu Wen also smiled. The reason why Monk Fa Kong had attacked Ji Nan was because he had taken a fancy to his identity as a Tao integration stage evil spirit. If he were to give Ji Nan away now, wouldn't all of his previous investments be for naught? Especially since Ji Nan was now like a turtle in a jar. A great Tao integration stage monk shouldn't have so little confidence in himself. During this period of explosive news, if the other star realms were just watching the show, then the ones who were suffering the most were naturally the people in Ji Nan's divine kingdom. Master, he has really been sealed. And Sheng's face was full of anxiety. He gritted his teeth and said, "Damn it. If we could have acted calmly, we wouldn't have." He had already been resurrected by Ji Nan, but the attack on them was the cause of this entire incident. Although An Sheng had a vile personality, he also understood the principle of repaying kindness. He was only able to achieve what he had today because of Ji Nan. Right now, he was blaming himself incessantly. Beside him, Red Tail waved her hand and said, "The divine kingdom is fine, so Master will naturally be fine as well. Let's wait for news." As the spirit of the divine kingdom, Yang was naturally the one who could contact Ji Nan the easiest. Now, everyone was waiting for her to appear. Red Tail was actually also very nervous. However, she understood that it was precisely at times like this that she and the others could not appear flustered. At the very least, before the enemy came knocking on their door, they had to maintain everything as usual. Master is fine. He will return in a few days. In the evil god's temple, Yang finally appeared. At the same time, she brought the most anticipated news to everyone. Red Tail and the others heaved a sigh of relief. On the other side, Xie Yun could not help but ask, "Most of Master's nomological powers have been sealed outside. This is fake, right?" When Tao integration powerhouses fused with nomological powers, they themselves represented a portion of the nomological powers. It could even be said that they were originally composed of nomological powers. This was the same as the godheads of lords. Most of the nomological powers had been sealed, which also meant that most of Ji Nan's power had been sealed. "It's real," Yang said bluntly. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone could not help but fall silent. They did not know what to say. Chapter 501. However, he could only open his eyes because his body only had a head, and the majority of his body was still empty. Like all Tao integration cultivators, Ji Nan's body had already fused with the nomological laws. Simply destroying his body could not really kill him. Ji Nan's body had already fused with the rules, just like all the other Tao integration cultivators. Merely having his body destroyed couldn't really kill him. On the other hand, Monk Fa Kong's seal had indeed sealed most of Ji Nan's nomological laws, so the power that he could mobilize was extremely limited. On the other hand, Fa Kong's seal had indeed sealed most of Ji Nan's nomological laws, so the power that he could mobilize was extremely limited. For Tao integration cultivators, the strength of their nomological laws actually represented the greatest explosive power of their power. The existence of the astral plane could rapidly replenish their nomological laws, so that they did not have to worry about the source of power and had almost inexhaustible power. It was also because of this characteristic that the Starlord system had replaced ordinary cultivators and become the most popular cultivation method. Most of Ji Yunan's nomological laws had been sealed, so the power that he could use was almost equivalent to that of a 10th grade Star-Lord. Using this upper limit of power to reconstruct Ji Yunan's ridiculously powerful body would naturally take a considerable amount of time. Ji Yunan roughly examined his body. It would take at least 5 to 10 years for him to fully recover, and this was the result of the evil god's body being able to repair itself automatically. This time might only be the blink of an eye for other Dao integration cultivators, but this was the most serious injury Ji Yunan had ever suffered since his debut. Meng Xian and Fa Kong's final crazy counterattack had indeed brought about very serious consequences, and their ruthlessness had also exceeded many people's expectations. If he had not reached Dao integration, perhaps this alone would have been enough to completely kill Ji Yunan. Of course, on the other hand, if he had not known his own advantages, Ji Yunan would not have fought like this. Perhaps he would have turned around and fled. I'll take this opportunity to accumulate some sin points and advance to 10th grade. Ji Yunan quickly made a decision. The lack of nomological laws did not affect most of Ji Yunan's combat power, so he was not in a hurry for the time being. He was not afraid that someone would take the opportunity to invade the god nation. He was just waiting for his body to fully recover. Teacher. Yang entered the evil god's palace alone and saw Ji Yunan, who had just reconstructed half of his head. Ever since something happened to Ji Yunan, Yang had sealed off the entire evil god's temple, forbidding anyone from entering. At the same time, he had also cut off the channels for outsiders to get information about Ji Yunan. Whether it was her or Red Tail, although they looked confident about what was going on, they were still worried. An astral realm that had lost its astral lord and had not nurtured a successor would face its fate. Just look at Nirvana back then. I'm fine. Ji Yunan's voice rang out in the hall. He did not even have a vocal cord now, so naturally, he could not speak. How's the blasphemer plan going? Vivian failed. Yang said calmly, it's already very difficult for her to break the structure of the nightmare godhead. Her fusion with the godhead isn't good, and the power she obtained isn't enough. God, Jiu Yang said Nan had, God Yang said. Yang. Jiu Nan had also expected this. After all, there was no such thing as a true chosen one in this world. In the end, Vivian was the first to fuse with a divine spark. On one hand, it was her own hard work, but at the same time, it was also an inevitable result of probability. They had prepared hundreds of experimental subjects and piled them up one after another. There was bound to be someone who could break the structure of the godhead. As long as he had the first one, it would be much easier for him to fuse with the power of the godhead later on. Sure enough, Yang then said, there are more than 10 blasphemers who have successfully fused with godhood. One of them even reached tier 7. The power of a Lord God far surpassed that of an ordinary god. Even after dismembering a godhead, it still possessed unimaginable power and was of great help to mortals. Of course, the powerhouses created in this way were mostly rootless duckweed. Once their power was exhausted, all that was left was their understanding of the laws. To put it bluntly, they didn't have a divine nation or an astral boundary as their foundation, so they naturally couldn't compare to ordinary powerhouses. Good. Ji Yunan's voice was calm. Continue with the plan. Ji Yunan was halfway through his sentence when he suddenly paused. His gaze slowly shifted upwards. At the top of the evil god's palace, a person was walking over slowly. Just as Meng Xian and Fa Kong were not thinking of getting rid of Ji Yunan in one go, an unexpected person had arrived. So you've already broken through. Ji Yunan's gaze shifted slightly, but his tone was still calm. It was as if this old friend before him was still an old friend. Shui Ren held his sword with one hand and stared at Ji Yunan's body, which had just been reconstructed with half a head. A smile appeared on his face. Not yet. Shui Ren shook his head lightly. I've been waiting for this moment. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure became blurry. It was as if his entire body had become illusory. However, his aura continued to surge and expand at an unimaginable speed. Rather than concealing the fluctuations of Dao integration, the mystic technique that Elder Zi Luo had given him only allowed him to be stuck at the critical point of Dao integration so that he could break through at any moment. But now, Shui Ren felt that he could break through. An inexplicable aura suddenly appeared in the evil god's palace, and it immediately surged toward Shui Ren. However, Ji Yunan shook his head and stopped it. "You want to kill me?" Ji Yunan asked, but he did not seem to have any doubts. Shui Ren responded calmly, "That's right. None of them believed Austin's words, but I think that's right. If I don't kill you, you'll destroy the entire world sooner or later." Ji Yunan's speed of advancement was terrifying, and he could be said to be the fastest. However, he was the reincarnation of a mighty figure, so this did not pose a threat to all Dao integration cultivators. Perhaps those who could become Dao integration cultivators would not be so frightened that they would lose their confidence in themselves. Only Shui Ren was not a Dao integration cultivator back then. Instead, he had personally witnessed Ji Yunan's progress. He also understood Ji Yunan's actions in the world of gods, and he had a deep understanding of the words the god's public enemy. Thus, Ji Yunan nodded. He did not pause for even a moment, and he rammed his half-reconstructed head directly toward Shui Ren. Even though he only had half a head, it did not affect the strength of Ji Yunan's body. This was because this was the head of the evil god's body. Even if he rammed it with his head, he would still be able to kill most Dao integration cultivators. Shui Ren, who had given up on his own path and come here with the intention of saving this world, did not even have time to react before he was rammed by Ji Yunan's head. Chapter 502. Reading. On this day, Yu Lian was giving a lecture in the Cave Void Realm. Hundreds of Taoists from the Cave Void Realm surrounded her. For a top-notch astral realm like the whole Void Realm, it had experienced many vicissitudes of life, so it naturally paid great attention to the cultivation of its successors. Even though Yu Lian's status was extremely high now, she would often give lectures in person. Not only did she teach them the principles of cultivation, but she also taught them the practical aspects of managing the astral realm and coordinating various places. For the Dao sect to be able to stand tall until now, pragmatism was indispensable. Today, the fish lotus blossom was the end of the hall. The Taoists would discuss among themselves and then make an evaluation of each family's opinion. The hottest topic of the day was naturally the battle between the 5 Dao integration stage mighty figures. Most of the Dao children of Dong Shu were true geniuses. Not only would one of them inherit Dong Shu's position in the future, but there were also many who left alone after failing in the competition and established their own star realm. Therefore, all of these Dao disciples had high standards and were full of vigor. When they spoke, they would definitely talk about the Dao integration battle and did not avoid it at all. That man's path was too smooth, after all. He battled 4 Dao integration stage super mighty figures on his own, and that's an astonishing feat, but he also suffered substantial losses. I believe that within 1,000 years, it will be difficult to hear news of that person again. I don't think so. In this world, the new generation always excels the old. The 3 Buddhas have sealed that person with the name of the evil spirit. There will definitely be another battle in 100 years at most. Now that things have come to this, it's useless for the 2 of you to discuss it further. After all, it's a matter of the future. On the other hand, the one from the Buddhist realm has obtained the power of a Dao integration stage evil demon. How to deal with the 3 Buddhas is what we need to consider. Dong Shu was the leader of the Taoist sects, so it was naturally not on the same level as the 3 Buddhas. Most of the Taoists had the ambition to control all forces, so they wouldn't forget about this. After the discussion paused for a while, Yu Lian finally said, "It's not a bad thing that Ji Yunan suffered a setback. Fa Kong doesn't understand the principle of getting rid of evil completely. He will be punished in the future." Everyone nodded in agreement. At this moment, an indescribable aura suddenly surged from the ground. Very few people had seen this kind of aura before, but almost all cultivators had heard of it in ancient books. This was a sign that someone was advancing to the Dao integration stage. There was another technique in the cave void, which was the heaven and earth congratulate the saints who shall appear. A new sage is about to be born. Who is it? I see sword chi crisscrossing in this sacred scene. Could it be? It's Shui Ren. Yu Lian was very sure, and the expression on her face softened. She had a good personal relationship with Shui Ren, so she was naturally happy for him. Congratulations, Sect Master. So it's the one with the extreme sword. I'm afraid his reputation as the #1 swordsman is going to be solidified. I think so too. Hey, why did the image of the sage disappear? When the inside of the cave was peaceful, the scene of the earth celebrating suddenly disappeared, as if a tape that was being played had been stuck. Many people did not understand that possessing the power to destroy the world and being able to destroy the world were not the same thing. Of course, most people didn't like it when others had such power. From this point of view, the result of the two was the same. So Shuiren came, he advanced, and then, he died. Under Yang's astonished gaze, Shuiren's head exploded, and his lifeless body lay within the evil divine palace. The aura of a Dao integration stage cultivator still lingered on his body. Even a true Dao integration stage cultivator wouldn't fare much better after being struck by Ji Yunan, let alone Shuiren, who had yet to make a true breakthrough. However, he was certain that Ji Yunan had already lost most of his power. In order to prevent Ji Yunan from escaping, he had appeared in advance, sending him to his death. Half of Ji Yunan's head fell to the ground again, and there was no change in his expression. However, there were some strange thoughts running through his mind. Shouldn't I get an achievement like Headshot Monster for killing high-level monsters in a special way? The image of the sage was mysteriously cut off halfway through its appearance, so no one knew who it belonged to. More and more people learned of Shuiren's inexplicable death during his breakthrough. Some people suspected that he was in a hurry to reach the Dao integration stage, which resulted in a backlash from the Great Dao. However, everyone fell silent when the location of Shuiren's death was announced. Shuiren had died in Ji Yunan's star realm. Ji Yunan had just sealed most of his power, but he was still able to kill Shuiren in the middle of his breakthrough. Some of the people who had been tempted by the Dao integration stage battles immediately quieted down. In contrast, Ji Yunan's image in everyone's eyes became unfathomable again, even though he hadn't been much better in the past. Under such a strange atmosphere, Ji Yunan entered a period of incubation that was neither too short nor too long. He healed his body while waiting for the Blasphemer project to bear fruit. Even though the first batch of blasphemers didn't bear fruit, the subsequent test subjects didn't disappoint. More and more divine personas successfully slayed gods, providing Ji Yunan with a steady supply of sin points. Ji Yunan's blasphemers killed gods at a rate that was almost 10 times higher than when Ji Yunan slayed gods himself. God Realm was still gradually being perfected. In fact, as the number of test subjects increased and the laws of the realm were gradually perfected, the actors were slowly retreating from the stage. Except for some subjects that required high attention, the use of actors had become less and less frequent. After all, actors were just actors. On the one hand, there were problems with their acting skills, and on the other hand, the script might not be the best development route. It was better to let them grow freely. Selecting 1 out of 100 subjects and using this kind of method to find a test subject would not be bad no matter how one thought about it. While waiting, Ji Yunan didn't just sit around. He didn't forget that there were still some experiments waiting for him to complete in the world between the gaps. Blue Planet, the world between the gaps. Fu Cheng received the complete information of Evil God from Professor Wang and understood Ji Yunan's intentions and requirements. She immediately began to restructure the game. This woman, who had built a gaming empire in 3 years, really had amazing game production talent. In just 2 months, she and her team had finished analyzing Austin, sorted out a complete growth path, and made it into the main storyline of the game. While maintaining the original console color, the entire game was based on Austin's growth path. At the same time, it also took into account the sandbox characteristics. Players could still do whatever they wanted in the Pantheon world. Of course, in contrast to Evil God, players did not need to obtain sin points for growth, but holy light points. It basically followed the leveling settings of the original game. Players needed to obtain holy light points and points during the first and second job changes to increase their level. That's the details of the game. Fu Cheng stood in front of a notebook and described the game that they had made bit by bit, without missing any details. This took several hours until Fu Cheng's mouth was dry. Finally, a few words appeared on the notebook. Chapter 503. Read. According to Ji Yunan's will, The updated version of the Evil God game, named King of Pantheon, Origin of Light, was officially launched. It quickly set off a wave of excitement throughout the entire Blue Planet civilization. On one hand, the game had taken nearly half a year from its initial production to its official release. During that time, Chengying Entertainment had invested all of their efforts into it, deliberately hiding the game's theme to whet the appetite of the players. On the other hand, it was also because of Evil God. Even though its creator had been forgotten by the players, it still held a rather high place in history. As the first game that could be described as super realistic, its name could still be seen in short films about the history of all kinds of games. Chengying Entertainment's sudden decision to release a remade version of Evil God triggered a wave of nostalgia. Many players even started playing old games from hundreds of years ago. The new game, Light Origins, also quickly gained popularity among the players due to its excellent production and early publicity. It truly opened up the market. Chengying Entertainment once again led the gaming trend, and people seemed to have gotten used to it. Fu Cheng's move to remake an old game was also interpreted by her peers in the gaming industry as opening up a new path, injecting a breath of fresh air into the highly homogenized gaming industry. No one thought that there was any deeper meaning behind it. Only Fu Cheng knew that this game was created under the instructions of another person. No, perhaps it wasn't a person who had actually created it. What do you need me to do next? Fu Cheng returned to the notebook and asked this question calmly, but her heart was not calm at all. These days, she had not received the power to rejuvenate people. This caused her originally youthful face to show signs of aging. The Fu Cheng who was 30 years old had not been sick for half a year. Her body was always in perfect health, and she did not want to return to her previous state. Monitor all players who have completed their second promotion and above, especially those who have completed their third promotion. These words gradually appeared on the notebook. This made Fu Cheng frown slightly. As the game producer, Chengying Entertainment could, of course, obtain the players' information from the server, but this kind of monitoring would be a long-term job. According to our design, the appearance of players who have completed their second promotion is very likely to happen in 2 or 3 years. Fu Cheng said carefully. Radiant Origins was a big game. It wasn't the kind of product that could be completed in a few afternoons. It had the potential to become a memory of a generation. Fu Cheng's actual meaning was that if she waited for this matter to take effect, she might not be able to hold on anymore. Before Fu Cheng could react, a beam of black light suddenly fell and cleansed her entire body. This time, it didn't just strengthen Fu Cheng's foundation. She could even feel a surge of strength coming from her body. Her clenched fists seemed to have the strength of 1,000 catties. With her understanding of cultivators, she could tell from certain details that she wasn't inferior to ordinary cultivators at this point. Even if only a portion of the nomological laws remained, it was still possible for Ji Yunan to give an ordinary person like Fu Cheng some benefits. Fu Cheng felt the surging power in her body and said gratefully, "I will definitely complete it. If you discover that a player who has completed the second transition or above has disappeared, inform me immediately." The words that appeared on the notebook made Fu Cheng stop talking subconsciously. "What do you mean by disappear?" Fu Cheng asked hurriedly. She didn't want anything to go wrong because she didn't understand the other party's meaning. Disappearing means disappearing. This was what was written in the notebook. In the Evil God's temple, Ji Yunan retracted his will from the world in the gaps. His gaze fell on the moon outside the temple, but his thoughts were slowly turning. Using Austin's journey to create the game was actually the result of Ji Yunan's careful consideration. As the Blue Planet civilization had been hundreds of years since his era, it was impossible to preserve the player's information from back then. Ji Yunan could only choose to restructure the game. Relaunching the Evil God game with a new look might give him another example, but this was also a somewhat risky move. If he really created another player, he might be playing with fire. Therefore, Ji Yunan chose the path of the God of Light. Even if there really was another player, the path of the Holy Light was destined to be high profile, and it was impossible for him to hide himself. As long as he destroyed it in advance, it naturally wouldn't be a threat. 5 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Unexpectedly, the progress of the players in Radiant Origins was slower than expected. The number of players who had completed the second transition in 5 years could be counted on one hand, let alone the third transition. Ji Yunan had been monitoring this batch of players through Fu Cheng, but at the moment, everything seemed normal. On the other hand, Ji Yunan's body restoration work had finally achieved a breakthrough after 5 years of accumulation. To put it bluntly, the so-called breakthrough meant that the body of the evil god had been restored to a certain critical point, finally triggering its own extraordinary recovery ability. Therefore, in the blink of an eye, it had completely recovered. It seems to be stronger than before. Sensing the power in his body, Ji Yunan acutely sensed it. Oh, so it's already level 12. After 5 years of accumulation, the Blasphemer project had also continued to advance. A large number of low-level gods had been eliminated, causing Ji Yunan's sin points to accumulate rapidly, and he had already broken through the standard of level 12. After the second transition, one's level would be completely dependent on the sin points. In fact, it wouldn't even allow the players to level up on their own. Instead, it would force them to level up. The way Ji Yunan had played in the past, where he could level up 2 levels consecutively while holding back his ultimate move, was no longer suitable at this stage. Ji Yunan wasn't surprised by this. He understood the efficiency of the Blasphemer project in gaining sin points very well. When he had just completed the second transition, it had been rather impressive. However, as the number of low-level gods decreased, the efficiency of this project would be greatly reduced. If he wanted to rely on this to reach level 13, he would need to spend at least 10 times the amount of time. I'd better think of a way to kill a chief god. This thought popped up in Ji Yunan's mind. Even if it was just a level 11 chief god, it would save him at least 30 years. However, chief gods weren't that easy to kill. It wasn't as simple as running up to them and killing them with a single punch. In the blink of an eye, they would be able to create 8 or 10 clones for you to kill as you pleased. In any case, it was fine as long as you didn't have to use the power of the godhead. Chief gods weren't fools. If you could kill them once, they would go into hiding. Why would they come out and wait for their deaths? On the contrary, the moment a player made a move, they would immediately be noticed by all the chief gods, and they would be attacked by a group of people. This was the greatest dilemma for second transition players. It was extremely unrealistic to destroy a chief god's divine kingdom. Therefore, players at this stage would often hide in the dark and play tricks to incite wars among the gods. Chapter 504. Reading. Ju Po. As one of the first 3 major planes that had evolved from the essence of the Earth realm, Ju Po had always been quite mysterious. Every star realm and plane had its own spatial coordinates, but not many people knew Ju Po's coordinates. At least not many people were qualified to enter this place. Under Ju Po's deliberate guidance, Ju Po became a semi-public plane. If outsiders wanted to enter, they had to go through a background and strength inspection. Of course, this was not strange. Inspections were something that most star realms would do. It was just that Ju Po's requirements were particularly high. Only star lords with star realms were allowed to enter this place. Just this condition alone filtered down the number of people who were qualified to enter to less than 1,000. However, apart from this rule, Ju Po looked very ordinary. He did not have any special rules, and he did not even have any special characteristics. Cave Void was the origin of Taoism, and the Divine Emperor also had a human Tao legacy temple. Only Ju Po had completely washed away the mark of the past. When Ji Yunan stepped into this place, he saw an ordinary star realm, just like Ju Po's ordinary face. What a rare guest. When Ji Yunan stepped into this world, Ju Po's voice sounded beside him. Chem. You've advanced again. It had only been a few years since Ji Yunan had fused with the Tao, but he had advanced again. This was indeed surprising, especially since most of his nomological laws had just been sealed. However, Ju Po was not an ordinary person. He had also come from a crack world, and he had witnessed the collapse of the 3 realms in advance. It seems that the history you've seen has not ended yet. Ju Po looked deeply at Ji Yunan. He was one of the people who had benefited from history, and he knew that if he could use this advantage properly, it would bring him considerable benefits. Ji Yunan did not comment on this. He only asked, Do you have confidence in working together against a main god the last time? Yes. Ju Po smiled. However, my target is only Fan Lun. I won't consider anyone else. The Master of Time, Fan Lun, Ju Po's investment in inviting Ji Yunan to work together was more of an excuse. So when Ji Yunan came looking for him this time, he didn't hesitate any longer and told Ji Yunan about his objective. Ji Yunan didn't know how Fan Lun had offended the 9 spirits to the point that he wanted to kill him. However, in terms of time, it was clear that this was not due to historical reasons. Fan Lun's debut was much later than Ju Po's, and even later than Netherworld Daoist's incarnation, the God of Dusk. But in terms of personality, it wasn't that strange. Fan Lun's experience and laws were more similar to Lu Wen's. However, his personality was similar to Zhu Jimink's. In other words, he was the king of hatred. Even within the world of gods, there were many who disliked him. Ji Yunan thought about it and said, "Sure. When do we make our move?" Farron was also a new main god. Apart from the fact that his laws were a bit special, his true power might not even be as strong as Lorenza, who had been a bit younger than him. "I'll inform you when the time comes." "All right." Ji Yunan nodded and turned to leave. Ju Po glanced at his back and said, "You're going to the 3 Buddhas?" Ji Yunan smiled. "Before I kill someone, I have to reclaim my power." The world of gods. A ray of light fell from the horizon and landed in an unknown god kingdom. It didn't seem right that it was unknown, because this god kingdom belonged to a new high-tier god, the God of Time. The God of Time, who had just ascended to rank 8, had only just begun to make a name for himself in the world of gods. The God of Time was not a rare law. There were many gods who had similar laws, but those who could truly reach a high level were few and far between. Firstly, this law was extremely obscure. Secondly, there was already a God of Time high above them, causing the other gods to lose their motivation to advance. If it was just a law that overlapped with each other, there was still a chance. However, the God of Time was extremely exclusive, and it was almost impossible for the later generations to succeed. To become the new main God of Time, the only way was to wait for Fan Lun to fall, or make him fall. This rank 8 God of Time, an unknown god named Sven, smiled after receiving the news from the other world. After leaving the 9 spirits, Ji Yunan did not even return to his god kingdom. Instead, he descended directly into the 3 Buddhas. Although the shadow law could not affect Ji Yunan's direct combat power compared to the heretic god's body, the characteristics of shadows were still quite useful. In order to go to the world of gods, Ji Yunan undoubtedly needed the power of shadows to hide himself and launch a fatal blow. The 3 Buddhas was a well-known Buddhist territory. Not many technological things were introduced here, and the people's faith was maintained pure. In a sense, the 3 Buddhas were similar to the god kingdoms of the world of gods. The only difference was that the Master of the Stars did not rely on faith to obtain power. Among the 3 Buddhas, the Buddhist sect was undoubtedly the most powerful sect in each region. The Buddhist temple was also an organization that had absolute authority over each region. The government was merely the executor of specific administrative measures. In the center of the 3 Buddhas was the holy land in the hearts of all Buddhist disciples, the 3 Buddha Temple. The 3 Buddhas were also named after the 3 Buddhas who established the world in ancient times. They were the founders of the 3 Buddhas and also the founders of the 3 Buddha Temple. At this time, there were some discordant voices in the 3 Buddha Temple. 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye. Can you tell me why Ji Yunan has not been suppressed yet? Monk Fa Kong sat on the golden lotus and looked at the Buddhas below. Although he was the 3 Buddha Star Master, the work of suppressing the heretic demons was not something that he could complete alone. In fact, he was not even needed. Since most of the laws of Ji Yunan were sealed and brought back to the 3 Buddhas, the monks had never stopped suppressing the heretic demons. Only by suppressing the heretic demons in the astral world could the astral world truly benefit from it. However, the progress of this work had been very slow. The outside world thought that the 3 Buddhas could even seal Tao integration practitioners and had truly achieved suppression. Unexpectedly, the 3 Buddhas had not benefited from it so far. At first, Everyone thought that it was because Tao integration level heretic demons were rare and needed more time. However, there was no progress in suppressing the heretic demons. This made Fa Kong angry. Hearing Fa Kong's question, a monk below could not help but stand up and speak. Uncle Master, based on the experience of this monk and the other Uncle Masters, the laws left by benefactor Ji Yunan do not seem to be affected by the Buddha light of subduing world. What do you mean? Fa Kong suddenly had a bad feeling. That is. The monk looked embarrassed. Benefactor Ji Yunan may not be a heretic demon. Chapter 505. Read. Although he said it was possible, the monk knew very well that this was most likely the truth. There had never been an evil spirit at the level of Tao integration, but they had sealed demonic treasures of this level, so they were not completely inexperienced. Even at that time, they had never heard that the target of the seal would not respond to the Buddha's light. And the law left by Ji Yunan was not affected by the Buddha's light at all. If this was the case, the three Buddhas would probably suffer a great loss. Before the monk could think about how to make this news true, the bad news had already fallen. At the moment when the roof of the three Buddha temple collapsed, the monk Fa Kong had already stood up and chanted the name of Buddha again. The golden light reappeared and pushed the falling roof back up. Fa Kong recognized who the person was at a glance and immediately said, Amitabha. Benefactor Ji Yunan, this is really a misunderstanding. Before he finished saying the word misunderstanding, his fist smashed down and hit Fa Kong's head. After all, Fa Kong had seen the horror of Ji Yunan. Moreover, they were in the three Buddha realm. He knew that he could not avoid Ji Yunan's punch, so he simply did not dodge. With a shake of his body, a round of Buddha's light slowly rose behind him. His whole body appeared to have 3 heads and 8 arms. His whole body turned golden, like a Vajra body. Fa Kong had gathered the power of the 3 Buddha realms and used the power of Vajra to resist Ji Yunan's punch. He had indeed done it. After the punch, although there was a huge sound of metal and stone colliding, Fa Kong was not directly destroyed by this punch. On the contrary, the aftermath of this terrifying punch set off an impact in the hall of the 3 Buddha temple. Most of the monks were directly thrown out, so there were many who died. Fa Kong also saw this scene and showed a look of pity. Benefactor, since you are not an evil spirit, why do you want to increase the sin of killing? If you are dissatisfied with me, why don't you let me take 3 punches from you? Okay. Ji Yunan agreed happily and punched Fa Kong's head again. Fa Kong's mouth twitched slightly. He really wanted to give him 3 punches without conditions, but unfortunately, Ji Yunan did not listen to his nonsense at all. Regardless of whether there were conditions or not, they would still be beaten. His diamond body reappeared, and the sound of collision this time was even louder. It was even to the extent that it was sharp, ear-piercing, and distorted the laws of nature. All the monks had already covered their ears and fled. They were unable to endure the might of a battle at the Tao integration stage. To be precise, it could not be considered a fight. It was just Ji Yunan beating up monk Fa Kong. This time, Ji Yunan was no longer punching. Instead, it was like a violent storm. His fists were like bullets, and he was going to turn monk Fa Kong into a sieve. No matter how strong the Vajra body was, it could not withstand such a blow. Monk Fa Kong did not even make a sound before he was smashed into countless pieces by Ji Yunan. He wasn't in a hurry to reincarnate and send himself to his death. Ji Yunan didn't bother with him as his gaze landed on the monk who had spoken previously. Where is my law? Ji Yunan patted Tyrant's shoulder and asked. Amitabha. Tyrant stood up. He was one of the few monks who had not been affected by the shockwave. Although you are not an evil demon, your murderous nature is greater than that of a true demon. Forgive me for not being able to comply. Ji Yunan glanced at him and asked, Aren't you afraid of death? Tyrant revealed a peaceful smile. I'm not afraid. Then, are you afraid that they will die? Ji Yunan pointed at a monk lying on the ground. Because the sound of the law had entered his ears, he was bleeding from his 7 orifices and lying on the ground. He was exhaling more than he was inhaling. The next moment, Ji Yunan stepped on the monk's head, causing it to explode. Blood splattered on the monk's face. You. Tyrant raised his head in shock and pointed at Ji Yunan, unable to speak for a long time. "Where is my law?" Ji Yunan asked again coldly. Tyrant gritted his teeth and did not speak. Unfortunately, after witnessing the death of several monks, he could no longer hold on and personally took Ji Yunan to the place where the law was sealed. In fact, it was not difficult to find the place where Ji Yunan's law was sealed. After all, the Three Buddha Temple was only so big. He could find it after a few rounds. It was just that Ji Yunan was too lazy to look for it himself. There were monks staying in the temple. It would be fine if they pretended not to see the two. However, if they dared to come forward, they would naturally not be able to escape from Ji Yunan. After a while, the law of shadow returned to his body. Ji Yunan patted his butt and left the Three Buddha Temple, leaving behind a mess. When the news came out, the people who had been arguing about whether Ji Yunan would die or not could calm down. Of course, even the most optimistic people would not have thought that in just 5 years, Ji Yunan would kill his way back to the Three Buddha Temple and give the big monks a hard slap in the face. The first to receive the news of Ji Yunan retrieving the law was none other than the Gods' Union. Inside the Ziluo Temple, Zhuangxian and the Grand Sage Celestial Empress stood behind the old man Ziluo and listened to him narrate the battle of the Three Buddha Temple. As a Dao fusing expert, the old man paid close attention and did not miss the beginning and the end of the battle. Senior Ji Yunan has an extraordinary background. It may not be a bad thing for the organization to draw a line with him, Zhuangxian said after a moment of silence. His mind was clearer than anyone else's. He knew that a person like Ji Yunan would not be easily manipulated. Rather than forcing him to stay in the organization, it was better to have nothing to do with him. The Grand Sage Celestial Empress also remained silent. She thought of the time when Ji Yunan had not yet fused with the Tao and had just stepped into the world realm. It seemed like it was just yesterday. The common sense of cultivation in the world had been broken by him time and time again. It did not matter if he did it again. The old man sighed softly and said, Shui Ren could not see through it, so he died. Zhuangxian, the organization is now in your hands. I hope that you will not learn from him in the future. Learn more from your master. Daoist Spirit Sun had inexplicably stepped down from the management of the organization. He had even given up on the astral realm and wholeheartedly went to the world of gods to develop again. This was indeed a little strange. At the mention of his master, Zhuangxian slowly raised his head. Is master still a member of the organization? Of course. The old man smiled. Your master has always been in the organization. After retrieving his law, Ji Yunan did not delay any further and quickly returned to his god nation. In the meantime, he also went to the crack world to take a look. Fu Cheng had done a good job in monitoring the situation. According to Ji Yunan's request, she monitored every player who had advanced to the second transition. First, she monitored their safety. Then, she monitored their living habits and other details. However, as the monitoring deepened, she did not obtain the results that Ji Yunan wanted. Instead, it only proved one thing. The Blue Star Federation was really safe after several hundred years. None of the players had met with any mishap. However, Ji Yunan was not too anxious. Up until now, there had not been any players who had advanced to the third transition. This could not prove anything. Chapter 506. Read. The World of Gods. While Ji Yunan was wreaking havoc in the Three Buddha Heaven and massacring all the Buddhas, a small matter happened in the world of gods. It was indeed a very small matter. The great Lord of Time, Fanluan, had accidentally discovered a young boy with extraordinary aptitude while traveling the mortal realm and brought him back to his god kingdom. The boy became the new holy son of the main god's temple and received the Lord's inheritance. Such things happened from time to time and were nothing out of the ordinary. However, the truly extraordinary matter was yet to come. The boy displayed astonishing aptitude, especially his sensitivity to the law of time, which was far beyond ordinary standards. The oracle in charge of teaching him was overjoyed. Not only did he do his best to teach the boy, he also hurriedly reported the news to Fanluan. However, just as the main god's temple rejoiced over the birth of a young prodigy in the god kingdom, a piece of news caught the main god's temple by surprise. The boy was not a mortal, but a son of God who had been left behind in the mortal realm. His father was the god of time, Sven. It was not uncommon for a son of God to be left behind, otherwise there would not be so many myths and legends in the main plane. However, it was very awkward for a son of God to be chosen by another god. Especially since the boy had already been brought back to the main god's temple to receive a new inheritance. Should this person be returned? Logically speaking, this was the son of a god, so it was reasonable. However, the boy had already received the Lord's inheritance, so how could he be returned? Moreover, this matter could not be blamed on the person involved. He was just a 4-year-old boy. How could he understand such things? Farnluen felt a headache when he heard about this, but he was never one to think too much about others. After some thought, he said, "Leave the boy. If Sven wants him back, tell him to come see me personally." When Farnluen's words spread, some people felt that his actions were shameless, but he was a great being after all, so no one dared to say anything. That was until Sven obediently went to the god kingdom of time and personally asked Farnluen for his son. Others might be afraid of offending Farnluen, but Sven was not. After all, he was also a lord of time. As long as Farnluen was alive, he would never become a lord, so he was no threat to others. No one knew the details of the discussion between the two. They only knew that they parted on bad terms and Sven did not bring his son back. However, after returning to the divine kingdom, Sven summoned his believers regardless of anything and brazenly launched a war against the divine kingdom of time. A level 8 god declaring war against a main god. This might sound ridiculous, but those who knew the whole story would be able to feel a sense of tragedy. Perhaps because they felt that they were in the wrong, the time divine kingdom did not respond to this. They just passively defended against the invasion from the outside world. Of course, this sort of invasion was meaningless. After all, a Tier 8 divine kingdom's foundation was far inferior to a main god's divine kingdom. Otherwise, Sven's divine kingdom would have been razed to the ground in a matter of minutes. However, Sven seemed to have gone mad. He continued to pour in all his power, and because of the Son of God, his believers were all unafraid of death. None of them succumbed to the power of the time god kingdom. At this moment, a message was sent to Ji Nan. "The time is ripe. I didn't expect you to have a share." Ji Nan stood at the border of the heavenly world. In a frontline plane, he looked at Ju Po and Lu Wen. Lu Wen smiled. "Or rather, it's my share. Ju Po and Fan Lun have some conflict, but it's not to this extent." Ji Nan glanced at the two and nodded. He did not doubt this. Back when he had just stepped onto the front lines, he had encountered Lu Wen and Fan Lun fighting. At that time, the two of them were fighting over the time arena. The two of them had ascended at similar times, and their laws were almost the same. However, he did not expect Lu Wen to have already made preparations. "How are you going to get there?" Ji Nan asked. Ji Nan had the law of shadows and was relatively familiar with the world of gods. It was not difficult for him to hide. However, Ju Po and Lu Wen were different. It was relatively difficult for existences at the level of the two worlds to interact without being discovered. Back then, in order to kill Ji Nan, Austin and the Lord of Nightmares had to rely on the power of the Dream Immortal's return to project the power of the laws here. They could only form a single attack. Ju Po said, "I have my own ways to get there. And I'm already here." An enigmatic smile appeared on Lu Wen's face. The Time God's Divine Kingdom War had reached its true climax. Even he himself had gone into battle, and it seemed as if he would not rest until he was dead. Even the surrounding gods could not understand. It was just a son of God. Why go to this extent? However, even if they did not understand, there was a reason for it. They could only watch and see how things would develop in the end. This development was completely out of everyone's expectations. Fan Lun was injured. Finally, unable to endure Sven's repeated harassment, the Time God could not help but take action personally to chase away this annoying fly. And then, he was injured by this fly's hand. A mere level 8 god, who could barely be considered a high-level god, had actually injured a mighty lord. This matter had completely overturned common sense. The person involved, Sven, became famous in this battle, and his name spread throughout the world of gods in a short period of time. Every faction tried to find out how Sven had done this, and the results were rather shocking. It was said that because the two of them had the same laws, Fan Lun had wanted to rely on his own understanding of time to forcefully reverse Sven's laws and let him understand the gap between them. However, it was precisely because of this action that he discovered that Sven's understanding of time was actually above his own, to the point of being one with space and time. "Who are you?" Fan Lun looked at Sven in front of him, his eyes cold. He had been injured because of the laws, but the injuries were not serious. Instead, the other party was still unwilling to let him go, which made him realize that something was wrong. This was definitely not an ordinary god, but the other party had the laws of time. Could it be that some fallen lord had revived? The time god Sven had a faint smile on his face, not at all like he had been robbed of his son of God. "Rather than worrying about who I am, why don't you think about how you're going to get through this, Fan Lun?" Fan Lun could not help but sneer. The other party's understanding of the laws had indeed exceeded his expectations, but to say that it could threaten him was an exaggeration. The gap between a lord and an ordinary god was not something that could be made up for with just a little bit of understanding. Otherwise, wouldn't the reincarnation of an almighty be invincible? If not for his suspicions about this person's identity, Fan Lun would have long since killed him. At this point, Fan Lun no longer hesitated, and that was exactly what he did. With a slight thought, the endless rain of time suddenly fell, its target being Sven. This was an attack that had materialized the laws, a confrontation of raw power. It was not something that could be reversed with mere understanding. However, Sven allowed the rain to fall on his body, as if he did not feel it at all. Finally, an unfamiliar aura began to emanate from his body, allowing Fan Lun to truly recognize him.